Guess I better add my ugly self up here on the page. Welcome everybody to another edition of Distilling 101 Distillers Chat. Questions and answers. Lagging a little bit. I was trying to get Rumble back up and working. For some reason it's being stubborn with us. I don't know. It usually is pretty easy in the past, but for the past this week it's been a little tough. It's acting up on us. So sorry to all our friends on Rumble. We're just trying to build, the platform there. So not 1,000 people there, but really, like to be able to stream to all the different platforms, so people will be able to see us from everywhere. All right, let's see. Let me get. I'm not able to see any chat right now, so I'm sorry if I'm missing you guys coming in. Bear with me while I get some of these links posted and we can get busy. Hope everybody's having a good weekend. I know I am. So let me get some of these links up there. Gotta go through all my different groups here that I post to. All right. Bear with me just a minute. All right. Let me post these up. Have to open everything up so I can post it. Hopefully, I can at least post a few before they stop me. Same shit every week. I'm going to have to contact Facebook and see if there's a way I can share more easily. There's got to be a better way than having to do it one at a time. Batch posting or something. I might have to talk to them. Guess you have to get a verified account before they'll even listen to you, though. So I don't know about all that. So if somebody in chat with each other in chat until I get there. I can't see anybody yet, so just bear with me. This is the bane of streaming on Facebook, having to do this every time. But it's so we can get out there and get to your favorite Facebook moonshine destinations, which should be Moonshine Militia or DIY Shiny stuff. But we try to get out there to everybody so everybody can enjoy the content and watch what's up and ask their questions. And there's a lot of good groups. A lot of these groups I post to have a lot of good admins and moderators that know a lot of stuff. And so not trying to usurp asking questions at your favorite pages, because a lot of times you got some pretty good admins, but there's some pages out there not so much, unfortunately. Oh, that was taking a while to get through. Hopefully they don't put the skids on me. Maybe I'll say hello to everybody and then go back and post a few more. What's going on, Clint? Good to have you with me, brother. I look forward to it every Monday and Wednesday, brother. I'm glad you do too. I love having you in here helping us. What's going on? The Bang. What's up, Anthony? Glad you're having a good weekend, brother. What's up, Curtis? Zimbabwe. Awesome. Good to have you with us, Mr. Zimbabwe. Maybe we can talk about some of the things you guys distill out there. I know that the fruits and grains out there may be a little different from what we do, so I'm definitely always interested in learning from people of other cultures and places and what they distill and what they got going on. What's going on, Scott? Tell me about Overlander Channel. What's up with that? Sounds interesting. Awesome. So this is some people that are basically just vlogging their way through Africa. That'd be freaking awesome, man. Beautiful. I'd love to go through Africa. I know it's as beautiful and sometimes as wild as it is beautiful. What's going on, Mr. Dance? I appreciate you, brother. What's going on, Craig? Good to have you with us. Good afternoon, sir. So let's see if I paused long enough to send out a few more links. We'll see. Probably not. We'll find out real quickly, though. So definitely looking forward to talking about what's going on in Zimbabwe and what kind of things do you guys distill out there. Definitely interested in hearing about that. Hey, Marcia, hello from Kentucky. We got several people in here from Indiana. I know a buddy of mine that comes in here quite often, a legal distiller in Indiana. Actually, I know several, a couple few legal distillers in Indiana. That'd be interesting to find out. In Zimbabwe, I would say they've isolated a lot of their own unique wild yeast, and I'm sure that they probably Snow and Kurt went through the U.S., then all the way to Argentina, and then put a van on a boat to Belgium. Now they're in Africa. Awesome, man. That'd be crazy. I love that. What's going on in Oregon? Yeah, Chris, Craig, it'd be interesting to find out. I'd say they probably have some wild yeast that they've isolated and used. A lot of people that don't have access to like Amazon or certain stores will utilize a lot of the fruit that or yeast that's on fruits and vegetables naturally. So, um, but I've seen certain places and tribes use the women. They'll chew up the grains and they'll spit it into a bowl. And a lot of people don't realize it, but the enzymes in our saliva is the same enzymes that'll break down the grains. So it'll help break those starches up, and just the wild yeast from the air ferments it. So I mean, there's a lot of ways, man. It's pretty interesting seeing how people from all over the world and many different cultures. I'm not talking about this Zimbabwe guy. I'm sure that it's different, but this was like maybe in Central America, a tribe in Central America or South America that was doing it that way. So it's interesting to see how things are done all over the world and all the different uh, pots and stuff they use. It's illegal to own a distiller here for personal use. Wow, well, it's the same way here in a lot of places. The Bang, it's sad. I think people should be able to, you know, have the freedoms to do what they want. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody else or create a victim. And I don't think you should be counting yourself as a victim if you just get drunk. Um, so I know here in America, I think, as far as our Constitution goes, and what I believe is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that's what it's supposed to be all about. You can make wine, you can make beer, but supposedly not whiskey, or higher proof distillates. They don't even allow you to freeze wine federally and make like Applejack and freeze distilling. That's considered distilling. So yeah, they sure did, Clint. Um, but that's still a it's still going on down in South America. They still continue to do that, and very interesting to watch. You know, there's some videos out there that, yeah, yeah. We try not to get too political. I don't know of any shipments that have been stopped. I know that there's tariffs and stuff, but we try to focus on positivity and just stick to the task of how to. But I'm not aware of any shipments being stopped unless it's some Houthi rebels or somebody that's stopping shipping, you know. But as far as I know, the America has not stopped shipping grains to anybody. Um, Maybe they have stopped it because they don't want to work the tariffs, but that's for another podcast in another place. Um, yeah, it originally started as a tax thing. Of course, the government at first they tried to play the we're concerned for your safety card. What's going on, Roy? So they played the we're concerned for your safety card, and then all of a sudden it became about taxes because they needed other ways to generate taxes other than just tariffs like they used to. So we now pay an income tax and a lot of other taxes and yeah, they tax it on the proof, so they feel that wine and beer is such a low proof, it's really not worth it because it is kind of a low proof. So they don't say anything over that, and they've actually made it perfectly legal and fine. But on the other hand, yeah, there are a lot of states and that have legalized it. So in certain states, it's legal, kind of like the marijuana situation. Um, yeah, so you can buy it at a store, you can have it for personal use, but you just can't make your own. Right. Um, Pretty much the same here, but here, years ago, a lot of states decided to break with federal law and vote marijuana in to be legally for medicinal purposes. And then after that, for a while, I think California was the first, of course, to do that. And then after a while, a few other states followed. What's going on? Hey, James, what's going on over the pond? So a few other, states kind of followed suit, and then states, the federal government decided that, they're just going to kind of take a back seat and let states continue their thing, but they're going to keep it federally illegal for the other states and to kind of prevent interstate dealings. So they kept it federally illegal, and then a lot of states went recreational, and the federal government maintained, we're still going to enforce it federally, but the states, I guess, are able to make their own decisions on this, but still federal. And that's kind of where we're at today with that. And they're starting to do the same thing with distilling. I know Missouri and I know there's a lawsuit in Texas. I know Alaska has some distilling. I know West Virginia now has some. They're getting ready to change the limits on it. I think the limit was like a gallon or so in West Virginia. They're like, wait, that was a little bit silly. Maybe at least 100 gallons or 50 gallons a year. 1 gallon, that's ridiculous. Why bother? So I think they're re having a second look at that rule and maybe going to increase the amounts. But I think like in Missouri, um, up to 2 people per household, they have to be 21 or older, and I'm not sure. I think they can't be have felonies and records. I'm not. Don't quote me on that. I can't remember. I did read the Missouri laws on it, and a lot of people that say, "Oh no, it's not true. That's bullshit." I got it directly from their .gov there in Missouri and their statutes. So if you want to read their statutes, They're available online. I actually went to it because I was tired of taking other people's word for it, which we definitely should do on the internet. Due diligence to do your own research and find the facts and find good data, and I try to do that every time I do some research. I try to find really reliable sources because, as we know, the internet is full of unreliable sources. I know I kid Reddit a lot because I found so many unreliable on Reddit. I think just anybody with an opinion gets on Reddit and just bullshits. So, but I'm sure there is some good information there on Reddit as well. But I like using them as an example because I read some pretty crazy shit on there. But so Missouri, up to 100 gallons per person that's 21 or older in the home, maximum of two, and you can't take it away from your home. Like if you wanted to have, but you can, but you have to get a permit, and it's a drawn out permit, so you can make up to 200 gallons if you have two in your home, and I'm per year. So I'm assuming that you can have up to 200 at any given time if you have two in the home that are 21. Um, if anything over that, they're going to get you, but I don't know how they're going to. You're not required to keep records or anything like legal distilleries are, so they're not really going to know how many gallons you made that year. Just don't have more than 200 at any given time, and I'd say you'll be fine because it's going to be really tough for them to prove how many gallons you made prior to that, right? So, um, but like if you wanted to take some, and friends can come over and drink with you at your home, but you just can't take it out. Yeah, yeah. So you just can't take it out of the home. But there are circumstances like, for a wedding or something, you wanted to take it to, a wedding or something like that for special occasions. There is a permit that you can apply for. Not sure how tough that is to get. I imagine it's not going to be easy. I imagine there's going to be a lot of paperwork and maybe even them coming there and checking everything out. So um, I'm not sure exactly. Um, what's going on? What's up, Brian? Mr. High Quality H2O there, Mr. LPR Shining House. Um, War bonds, I don't think that'd be considered a donation. That definitely helps, but it's like a savings account. The war bonds were like kind of like a savings account. You'd get, I think, a certain percent of interest on them, if I'm not wrong. I may be wrong. I'm not that old, uh, but back to the legal distilling. So certain states like Missouri, will out to a certain extent, and I think that's the way it should be. I think as long as you keep it in your home and you're not taking it out, you're not selling it, it's for personal consumption and with your buddies at home. I see absolutely nothing that should be wrong with it. It's not like you're cranking out meth or something like that. It's just a little bit of alcohol. Everybody's just about everybody's drank at one point in time of their life, and if they shouldn't, they probably should at least once in their life. Yeah, there not used to be no income tax. Only tariffs, right, Clint? We used to run the government used to be funded purely on tariffs, and then we allowed it to change. But again, we're getting away from things. But yeah, that's the way we originally set up. And taxes on liquor, there was the whiskey rebellion, when they started trying to tax us too heavily on that. And then, of course, the depression came, and then prohibition. It let a few hens in the hen house, and they decided to get their political hubbies involved and get rid of all this alcohol. Well, heathens didn't need this stuff. So we went through the prohibition and had to deal with all that. So I guess we back to modern. But strangely as it may seem, there even here in Kentucky, there's a lot of places that are dry. They don't even allow the sale of alcohol still in places. That's just crazy to me this damn time that there's still dry areas. Oh, was the war bonds? Oh, just a donation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they also ask him to save grease. All your bacon grease and all your fats and oils. There was a lot of recycling going on. So there was a lot of things that people did to help the war effort. They saved all their fats and oils that used to help lube and I guess make flamethrowers and uh, who knows what other kind of bombs that they used. Incendiary type bombs that burn and um, not quite sure. I don't think I don't think they had napalm back then. Maybe I don't know that they made with oils and soaps. I guess that's how you make napalm. But yeah, it's there was a lot of recycling and a lot of people saving things for the war effort, and they'd put their stuff outside, and people they'd come along and collect, the fats and oils and metals and everything that they're um, recycling. Pretty interesting. Yeah, what happens, Ty, is the taxes that we pay help fund the oversight. So we do that in a lot of things, like hunting, for example. Hunting licenses pretty much pay for all the game wardens and all that. It's pretty much a self-funding thing, and uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. There was a lot of oils that got refined. Just regular cooking oils that they would take in and refine and use them for lubes, machine gun lubes, tank lubes. I mean, they'd turn it into greases, sticky bombs. If you've watched, what was that Tom Hanks movie, Private Saving Private Ryan, with the sticky bombs? Yeah, yeah. But um, the alcohol taxes basically help pay for all the government oversight and the employees that they use to help regulate, come in and do the counts and the checks in some states. It's really interesting here, the bang, how each state's different. A lot of states will actually buy your liquor, but you have to inventory it. But they'll buy it as soon as you make it. They'll buy it, and they tell you what price you can charge for it. It's kind of crazy for me to think about our government, allowing that. We're supposed to be capitalist society, and their price setting and fixing for people that's doing it. That just doesn't seem right. It goes against everything that I think that we're for, but that's the way it is in some states. I think Ohio and some other states are that way. So it's different in each state, which makes it interesting. If you're going to open up a distillery, probably a good idea to do some research and find how difficult it's going to be in a lot of different areas where it may be a little easier to open up shop. But then again, also check supply and demand. So a lot of places where it's easy, a lot of people go there, so the supply gets pretty much filled, and the demand kind of wanes a little bit, and that can have an impact. So hello, Miss Lisa, hope you're having a good Saturday. Yeah, it's interesting how each state has lots of different regulations and rules. I think it'd be a lot better if every state did it the same way. Um, just so it's just, I think it's unfair that some people in some states probably, it's real easy for them to get into it. What's going on, Jeff? So some people, it's real easy for them to get into it. Yeah, yeah. In North Carolina, same way. They sell it in their stores. So and I'm not sure if they price it in North Carolina, but I think in Ohio and some states they tell you what you can sell it for. So they're basically setting the price for you, man. It's just, yeah, I don't know how all that works. I don't want to get too involved in it because there's a lot that I have not researched, and this is just stuff I've learned in speaking with other distillers. Tracy Baumgardner and John Bentz, that have opened up in Ohio. I talked to them quite a bit about what's going on in your state and how your state's different, and you know some people in certain areas of the state have certain people that come in and do the inspections, and they, uh, issue the permits. And some of them are a little more lenient than others. Some of them are sticklers, and they don't seem to, this, whatever I shared doesn't necessarily come from John and Tracy though, but sometimes they'll come in and they'll say, oh, you need to do this. And it's like, okay, so you do this, and they come back in. Okay, glad you did this. Now let me look around. Oh, you need to do this. So they won't come in and just tell you everything you need to do at once so you can get everything done. It's like they just do. So this is in certain areas, and certain people. I'm not saying they all do that, but and then they're just coming in and just like picking. Oh, well, you haven't done this yet, and it's like it just keeps the process going and keeps them coming. And every time there's a charge when they come in, right? And there's a fee. Yeah, it gets a little bit corrupt and political, it seems. But things you got to do to be a law abiding citizen. Sometimes it's got to jump through a lot of hoops for them. And I think some states, and I think sometimes they're trying to make it prohibitive almost, or they're trying to discourage people from doing it by making it difficult. Sure seems that way. But yeah, it's bizarre that in some states, that it's that way. Um, yeah, yeah, and it's crazy. And if you don't, what's going on, John? And if you don't sell X amount, why would they require you to make X amount? So I think that the amount you make should be pretty much in step with the demand of your product, because you don't want to oversupply, especially if they use that for setting prices, because once you have an oversupply, the cost tends to drop, and until demands, until you increase the demand for it to a point where it balances. So it's just good to hear, brother. So it's interesting to hear how each state is different. John, Tennessee's a pretty good state. What's going on, Chris? Kentucky's a pretty good state. There's some decent states. There's some out in the Midwest and West that are very lenient, um, and others aren't. Well, you're gonna have to make some, brother, or buy it at the store. But yeah, on Facebook and stuff, we can't talk about buying and selling um, individually. So we can't do that on here. But yeah, they're really shot. Awesome. I definitely need a shot. Well, it's time for everybody to take a shot. How's that? What y'all drinking tonight? They'll let us drink on here though, but we don't, can't talk about. We can talk about stores selling it and about the legalities and how it's legal in certain states. But as far as talking to individuals, where can I get some and all that? Yeah, Facebook and YouTube both. They just, for some reason, they have issues with that. I guess they drugs and alcohol and tobacco and even weed where it's legal. They're exploding. Well, you got to make sure that you got to make sure that what type of pot are you using? You got to make sure that you have a pretty good worm and a free flowing, where the steam can flow freely. Maybe you got too small a hole um, at the top of your pot. Sometimes if it's too constricted and you're building up too much pressure, maybe you're getting it too hot and trying to go too fast. Um, so that could be the problem. So you want to maybe go a little bit slower, and let's start out with what kind of pot do you have? Is it just basically a stainless steel pot, or no? It doesn't have an off flavor. It's just got a lot of fire to it. It's real hot, Craig. And if you run it on a column, you can take some bad flavors out of anything if it's bad. I think a lot of times people do the sugar to make it more neutral, and but yeah, sugar wash tends to have a bit more bite to it. A lot of people call it a fighting liquor. It can have some off flavors if you don't do it right. If you're anytime you stress your yeast, you're going to get off flavors, and sometimes those off flavors wind up being good. So, and yeah, raisins will mellow it out. I think we talked about on the shit show a little bit last night. Um, a lot of people think raisins are a good nutrient, and they do add some essential vitamins and minerals to a fermentation. Grind them up real good. Make sure you break through the skin on them. And they definitely add some smoothness, and they do add some nutrients, but they don't have yan and fan. And you have to have yan and fan, and that's yeast assimilable nitrogen and fan free amino nitrogen. So if your nutrients have to have that really to feed the yeast the way they want to be fed. Um, Other things supplement that. So, like a raisin will supplement that, or like tomato paste will supplement that, but neither one of those have the anafan that you really need, essentially. That's why I recommend using the DAP. A lot of people swear against it, but, you know, billion-dollar wineries, multi-million dollar, places use it. So if it's used commercially in a lot of the best wines and spirits, I'm pretty damn sure it's going to be good enough for us at home. A lot of people express, they say it's horrible and it's got urea and all these things in it, but they really can't give me a definitive answer on what's so bad about all that. So, um, if you can't bring the facts to the argument, best sometimes not to argue. But yeah, um, raisins, yeah, in your sugar wash is if that's the angle, yeah, that. But anyway, let's get back. So when you do a sugar wash, it's a very kind of a fast fermentation because it's just pure sugar. Generally, it's a table sugar, which is a sucrose, which is a fructose and a glucose bound together, making a disaccharide. And yeast can consume disaccharides okay, not as easily as a monosaccharide, but they can eat a disaccharide okay. This takes them a little bit longer, and the fructose takes a little bit longer for them to digest and eat. Um, but anytime that you have like a sugar wash, you should buffer it because a part of a product byproduct of the fermentation process is amino acids building up, and I'm talking about a lot of uh, looking for the right word, a lot of organic acids start building up, and what happens in a sugar wash, those acids build up really quickly, and you get what's called a pH crash. And if you don't buffer that properly from the very get go, the pH can get so low so fast that it stresses the fuck out of the yeast and they start giving off bad flavors. So, yeah. Well, exactly, Clint. You don't always need that. You don't always need, but for like your brandies and for your sugar washes, yes. Malted, anything malted using any malts at all absolutely does not need any nutrient whatsoever. I'm trying to focus on just this sugar wash for now, and I'm glad you pointed it out for people that may have misunderstood me. But right now, I'm focused on the sugar wash, and with sugar washes and a lot of fruits, you don't have that yin and fan, so you need to use nutrients. With just corn, if it's not malted, you probably be okay, but it might not be a bad idea just to add a touch, like a fraction of what's normally needed for like a sugar wash or a brandy or a fruit that doesn't have the anafan, because corn in alone has some, but not a lot. If it's malted, it's fine. Um, but if you're using any kind of malt whatsoever in your mash bill, you don't need it. Actually, you can use it as a nutrient. You can take like let's say bran flakes. You can take those bran flakes and the powdery stuff at the bottom, or you can pulverize it. You don't have to, but it helps it get mixed in better. You can use bran flakes. That's a very good. You can use boiled yeast and use dead yeast. There's lots of different things you can use, but DAP is like $10 for a pound, $11 a pound, and just don't overdo it. Definitely with the nutrients when you're using DAP and that type of nutrient, you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to think, well, the a little bit's good, a whole lot has to be better, kind of thing. No, that's definitely not the case. So you can use too much and affect your flavors. So you definitely don't want to use too much, but you need to have it in there to help keep yeast happy in your sugar washes and in most of your brandies, because a lot of the fruit's not going to have a lot of that. So there's other things. They make a stable, a 5.3, that you can put in that sugar wash to help keep the pH at about 5.3. It's a calcium carbonate. Or you can use oyster shells. We talk about that a lot on here. You know, at your feed and supply store, you can use it in your garden. I boil it, make sure there's no bacteria or off flavors, try to get any salts that may be in there out. And then after that, I let it, let it dry out and crush it a little bit. Smaller pieces give more surface action or surface area, and it allows it to buffer better and easier. It's not great for like lowering your pH, but it will, as your mash or wash or whatever acidifies, it will start eating away at the calcium carbonate, and it'll help kind of neutralize some of the acids, and it'll help keep it buffered. So, doing those things to your sugar wash will help prevent some of those off flavors. Um, hope that. And to raisins, yes, you can add raisins to that same sugar wash and take some of that bite out of there. It definitely makes them a little bit smoother, and it gives some good flavors. There's definitely some good flavors that you can get from that. The bang, I'm still waiting on you to tell me what kind of steel you got. Oh, your fermenter keeps on exploding. Oh my God. I'm sorry, I just reread that and I'm like, okay, you need to put a hole in it. You don't want to put your lid on it tight. It needs to be able to breathe either through a bubbler or through a cloth. So just put a towel over it and allow it to respire. That way you don't build up a lot of CO2 pressure, because the fermentation process creates carbon dioxide. And if you put the lid on it, it'll blow. So I'm sorry, I read that as boiler. I guess from earlier where somebody said something about exploding. Were they talking about the fermenter or the steel? Because I could have sworn I read steel because I see that. And I'm sorry, I misread that entirely. Sorry about that. But yeah, your fermenter needs to be able to breathe and to off gas some of that CO2. So that's what it is. Yeah, don't put your lids on tight. Keep them loose, or just put a towel over it with a rubber band or something to keep the wind from blowing it off or critters from pulling it off. Or you can buy NGS and blend it with your in-house distillate to keep up with the state's quota. Oh yeah, yeah, yep, yeah. That's basically to. So if you can't keep up, you can buy like a multigrain product or a neutral grain spirit, and from other places that wholesale it. They basically, that's all they do. They create this NGP or NGS, and they sell it, to places specifically for that, or place. There's some distilleries that don't distill. They just buy this and blend it and sell it. You'd be surprised. Let's see. I'm starting to get behind here. On my steel building pipe from steel to thumper, fitted pressure relief valve on tri clamp system and to worm. Okay. One thing that I would make sure that every still has is a way to open the still up once you're done distilling. You know, you definitely need to open it up and get air to it. That way it doesn't implode. Because especially when you use a thumper, because you're getting some back pressure there, and as it cools, it can easily cause a really nice copper steel to implode. So um, having that pressure relief valve is good, um, and having a valve, just a regular open and shut valve, just a gate valve, is awesome to have as well. That way you can open that thing up right when you're done, or you can pop the cap off. You know, either or works just the same. You know, but open it up so it doesn't cool inside faster than outside, or outside faster than inside, or well, it'll suck right up on you and implode. And I've seen some very nice steels do that. Yeah, I know. And you know, another interesting thing, John, um, different states have different proofs. So your state obviously is 180. I think some states allow the full 191, some do 180, some like 151, some are 100. You know, it's strange, but Everclear in different states, excuse me, Everclear in different states, you have to get whatever the state's legal highest proof allowed is. Like Ohio, I think it's like 110 or 121 or something, maybe 121 or something like that. It's not real high. Somebody correct me. I'm sure I know I'm not right on that, but it's kind of low, surprisingly. So like the Everclear in Ohio is going to be, you know, the biggest thing you can get is like maybe a 131 or some shit. I can't remember what the numbers is, but it's different in every state. I thought that was really interesting. How about using them after distilling to smooth it out, or is it no? Post, you can definitely use them to take the bite out as well. A lot of people do that. They let them, you know, swell up and eat the fruits. They're really good to eat. They soak up a lot of alcohol. Um, but it's yeah, it can be used during fermentation to help give some nutrients, not complete. And to, you know, some add some interesting flavors, and certainly post just the same. Absolutely cool. Yeah, yeah, I use that too. You know, I do a lot of brandies, so I use with my wines and stuff. I use Fermade and Fermo and Fermax, DAP. All of them work very well. Some people swear by Fermo, and you know, they like that organic angle that it adds. But most of the time, I use just plain old DAP too. Yeah. Red Star Distillers yeast in your sugar wash or wine wash. Yep. Red Stars Distillers, good stuff. Regular old Dady, Dady. What's the best size copper pipe worm? 15 or 22 millimeters. Oh, you're breaking out the millimeters on me. Let me look at my conversion chart. It really depends on the size of your steel first, James. So you know, I'm going to go if you're like a 20 gallon or less. You know, a half inch is perfectly fine. If you're going above that, you know, 5/8, and buy your copper coiled. You can buy it in a box, coiled up and ready. Don't try to buy L or M stick copper and bend it and try to form it and shape it around some round object. It's very difficult. A lot of people say, "Oh, you can pack it with excuse me, I'm getting hiccups. Terrible. You can pack it with sand and heat it up and do it, but that's a pain in the ass and a lot of work. And you know, buying it in uh, spools in a box already coiled up. People say, "Oh, but that's softer copper. That's that cheap soft." No, you want that cheap soft copper. It's very easy to bend, shape for that worm. Trust me, it doesn't just kink up on you in the worm. Once you get it in that flake stand or that bucket or whatever you got, you know, of course, you want to, you know, put some wood each side of it and you know, tack it in with some clamps. I'm not sure what they call the little wall clamps that you use in plumbing to tack it to the wall. Strapping. Um, but you definitely want to, strap it, but definitely buy coil, and that 5/8 coil works well for larger steels, and as little as 3/8 for some of the smaller stuff. But I would try not to go lesser than that, for sure. On like a 10 or a 20. But the larger you go, generally, especially like between your pot and your thumper, and from the pot to the worm, it'll speed up your distillation rate too. So it's a little faster. I'm using 2-inch spools, so I use stainless 2-inch, and I put copper mesh in it to help take out the sulfide. So that 2-inch, it goes pretty quickly on like an 18.5-gallon still. Yeah, I can be dripping in 45 minutes to an hour. I can be through my hearts in 4 hours, and if I run it all the way down to sweet waters, I can be done in 8, which is pretty good time if you're talking about running it all the way down to 10 or 20. So it does take quite a bit more. DAP is okay. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's great for, if we're talking about like your bourbons or your brandies and your wines and your sugar washes and your tequilas and things like that. But when it comes to grains, when you're using malted grains, or even like we were talking about, like flake, like a crushed flake. Bran flakes work great. That makes a good nutrient. There's a lot. You just don't need it a lot when you're using the multi grains. So yeah, your grains will give you all the nutrients that you need when you're doing a multi grain. Corn is okay. You don't really have to. It does help just to touch, to help things along, but it's not. What's not true, Chris? What's up, Hoochie Hooch? Glad you're in the house, brother. Yep, that's right. They quit pissing and they start shitting on you. That's a fact, brother. They'll shit all over you, man, if you don't keep them happy. Yeah, definitely inverted sugar makes them keeps them happy. They definitely prefer that. Yeah, that's hilarious. They definitely shit on you, man. You got to keep those yeast happy. Keep those cavorting beasties happy, man. It's funny if anybody's had biology back in the old days when they first made microscopes, before they started naming cells and stuff. They would look at all these, like in water, and they would see all these cells swimming around, and rotifers and all these things, propelling them around, and they called them cavorting beasties, is what the name of bacteria and all this stuff was before they actually started scientifically naming them. It's funny to look at the history of some of that stuff. But yeah, they'll shit on you, man, if you don't keep those yeast happy. And that's one of the keys to really successful fermentation and really good flavors. Now, some some really high level distilling techniques um, will stress yeast in a certain way to get a certain flavor, but that's a different story and a different level, and something I don't really like talking with beginners about, because they try to experiment and they're like, well, let's see, let's just let the pH get down to 2 and see how that works. No, but certain distillers will stress them in specific ways. Um, I know some people like using cinnamon to stress. Others will use different things to stress them, to try to get specific off flavors that will actually maybe estrify into something good. But that's higher level stuff, and something that, if you want to experiment, it's probably be a good lesson, to see. Is red start distillers yeast good for all mashes? You can use about any yeast you want to, but um, if you're just going to buy one yeast and you're going to do everything from sugar washes to tequilas to rums to vodkas to grains to everything, I would say probably an Alvin EC1118. If you're just going to buy one yeast to do it all, that would probably be the one yeast I would recommend getting, because it can basically do everything you want it to, and you know, when people post those links, I hope y'all don't follow those because yeah, we don't want to, but don't anytime people post links, please don't follow them on here unless I post them. Don't. Um, but yeah, Red Star is good. That's a daddy's yeast. It's DADY is dry distillers um, dry active distillers yeast, DADY acronym. But like an EC1118 is probably a really good all around one. If you're just going to have one yeast in your box, that would probably be my choice. Now, again, this is not facts, so don't get me wrong. Um, I'm glad to hear the bang, and definitely let that thing breathe a little bit. So EC1118 is a good one just for everything, but Red Star Data yeast is perfectly fine. You know, it's a perfectly good yeast. But as you advance, you know, certain wines will do better. Getting back to the EC1118, it's probably the best at all and the master of none. So it's not the best yeast for any one thing, but it's good to very good for almost everything. That's why they say if you're going to use one, that's the best one. But there's certainly individual yeast that are specific and bred and created specifically for certain fermentations, kind of like your um, tequila. You know, they make a blue agave type a yeast specifically for that generally tends to work a lot better. Lalvin has like a D47 that's probably better with meads and honeys and things of that nature. I think they add some specific additional enzymes to help break down some of the unfermentables in honey. There's some specific rum yeast that do the same. They add some different enzymes to help break some of the unfermentables down that normally wouldn't if you like used an EC1118. So there's certain specific, and of course, whiskey and rum and pretty much vodkas. You know, a lot of people swear with their turbos for vodkas, which probably be okay if you're going to put it on a column and get a lot of the off flavors that could potentially. I think a lot of people get a lot of off flavors from turbo is because they put too much nutrients in their turbo, and if you're using that with something that's nutrient rich already, you have way too a nutrient overload, which also can stress yeast and also can taste bad. So that's why Clint and I were talking earlier. Certain ones you can use a little, and you don't want to overdo it ever. Don't ever overfeed. That's as bad as underfeeding, or worse sometimes. Um, yeah, it's good for EC1118 is probably great. You're not going to go wrong with a Dady either. For just getting started and getting your feet wet. Even bread yeast, it's perfectly fine, especially for grains. There's a lot of big distilleries that still use bread yeast and swear by it. And I know a few. So, but there are some really good yeasts out there that will give you a lot of different notes, florals and vanillas and different notes that other yeast aren't going to give you. So definitely experiment with it and don't get yeast bound. Don't, try different yeast and try doing everything the same way except the yeast. And that way you can, do a pretty good experiment and the only differing factor will be the actual yeast used. That way you can kind of narrow it down to what yeast you like. But there's just so many good yeasts out there. I used Red Star Premium Rouge and Premium Blanc. I use the Rouge for a lot of my darker fruits and my brandies. The Premium Blanc for like my white grapes, peaches, and things like that. I like the notes and florals they give. There's just so many different yeasts though, and I highly recommend people try different ones for like your whiskeys and grains. It's gonna be hard to beat. You know, Firm Solutions 927. That's or 947. They've got lots of Firm Solutions makes excellent stuff. Tracy sells good stuff. He's got good yeast. I think North Georgia's got good yeast. Phil Billy's got good yeast. There's there's a lot of places to get it. You know, and try. I definitely highly recommend everybody experiment with different yeast though. Don't get yeast bound to using the same one. That's awesome, Tabane. Keep coming in here, buddy, and asking your questions. You can't ask too many questions, my friend. That's what we're here for. Yep, they sure do. I'm glad to. We're here to help, brother. So keep asking those questions, and a lot of people. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, 151 with the Everclear in Ohio, and in some states it's 131. Some states it's 181. It just varies state by state. It's crazy. What's going on, Kenny? What's up, Larry? Glad you guys are here with us. Bettendorf, the main boiler and thumper will be pressure and his APRV. When you kill the heat, it can cause vacuum. It was like, yeah. So I use just like a regular valve, just a regular gate valve, the sucks vacuum valves. That's what he's talking about. A pressure valve will blow if you get too much pressure. Well, a vacuum valve on the opposite does the same thing. So if you get a certain suction and pressure, it'll open up and let air in so it doesn't implode. It's just like a pressure one, but opposite. So those work pretty well too. And yes, I get little moths and fruit flies in there. That's another thing happens when you make brandies. You'll have to deal with the damn flies. DAP is diammonium phosphate. It's something that they've developed from, well, years ago. I guess wineries used different sources. I'm not sure exactly what they used before the diammonium phosphate. They probably used grain. They probably might have boiled yeast and killed yeast to use to ferment or to nutrients. But I think they spent some money and time and found out that diammonium phosphate is worked out really really well, and it's basically you're it's just like growing plants. It's a lot of this people don't understand, but it all relates once you start looking at how the body does with enzymes and breaks down these grain enzymes and breaks down those sugars and starches out of the enzymes so we can use them for our muscles and our cells. It's the same thing in fermentation, getting them to the yeast, so you'll see a lot of similarities when you start looking at biology and stuff. But DAP is just a simple diammonium phosphate that gives plenty of nitrogen, and they also, I'm sure, have a lot of other um, sub nutrients in there as well that help. If not, you can always supplement the DAP. You can always, some people use tomato paste. I personally don't use it, but there's some things in there that help. But if you're doing grains, you really don't have to worry about it. But like with your sugar washes and your brandies, um, you know, having that DAP is probably it's very inexpensive. You use very small amounts, so that 1 pound will last a long, long time unless you do pretty decent volume. So um, it's just it's good. It lasts a long time, and it's a good all around. It'll keep your yeast happy, and that's what we want. Yep, main boy. Yep, yep. You got to release the vacuum, and then, like I say, just putting a cheap valve on your cap is a great way if you're using like the the like a bever. That once it cools off, you can kind of lift. Or I think the bevers actually have a little valve on the top, so you can just open up those little valves. I know some of them have airlocks that you can use them for fermenting, so they've got a little valve for that airlock. So when you put that, use that same lid, you generally keep it shut. Of course, when you're fermenting, you don't want steam coming out, or I mean distilling. But when you're done, you can open up that little valve and just let the air flow in and out as it wants to, and that will prevent you from from imploding. And I've seen some very nice copper steels look like a can. Just yeah, it's a sad sight. But after that happens, you can pressurize it. It's kind of dangerous. You need to be in a safe area when you do it, but you can also pressurize it to help blow some of those dents back out. I've seen a few do that, and you might have to solder in some splits. If you put too much air in, you might split the seams. So I've seen that happen quite a bit too. But an ounce prevention. So, learning, these are things that we try to teach every beginner, after that, after you make that run, like if it's a football steel, you can just unloosen that football or open it up, or you can open up a little valve. If it's a copper steel and you've got a tri-clamp, you can loosen that tri-clamp and let it, move the head a little bit. Just let it get some air in there. Make sure you got your grill gloves on. Don't recommend doing it while it's still boiling crazy. You got valves that you can install on top, but it's very important to do that. Even 55-gallon drums, I've seen. Now kegs probably going to be a little tougher, but you don't want to even risk it. So, have that little valve you can open on the top. That helps a lot, especially when you're using thumpers and jar rigs, because it's really easy to get a vapor lock when you do that. Awesome. Yeah, I like to buy it just in the box, coiled up. It's so easy, just stretch it out, and it's so much easier that way. And it's not. I don't think it's any that much more expensive to buy it that way. I mean, I think it's for like HVAC use and refrigeration use and things. So it you don't really need high pressure copper like what you use in your home, like the L&M sticks, because your water pressure at home, it can get up to 100 psi, or more in some places. So you're dealing with a pretty decent pressure there, right? Well, on your steel, 3 to 5 psi. If you have maybe 6, 8 jars, it might go a little higher. Or if you have a big, huge thumper with high volume in it, and it's taking a little extra to blow through, it might get up to 5 or 6, psi. But generally, you don't have a lot of pressure like you would in a pressure cooker, unless you have a really small aperture line leaving your steel, which is one thing I don't like about some of the Vevers, like the 13, 18-gallon Vevers, 3 pot, not the football, but the 3 pot. Some of them have these little 3/8 inch lines. Now you can build up some pressure with a really small line like that. You get a lot of vapor velocity blowing through your worms, and those worms are generally undersized. So those are recipes for disaster. So if you get those, you probably should do a little bit of work on them. They will work if you go really low and slow, and you keep a lot of cold water in that condenser that's way undersized, but it's a lot of extra work that you can avoid. It's a lot of extra risk you can avoid. And when you have more pressure in your pot, the temperatures tend to elevate. You tend to puke. You tend to get more foaming, and more pressure generally means more temperature. And then you get a lot of. It's harder to make your cuts properly. Yeah, I got you, brother. I know what you said. Why do you exist? I exist because I am. That's why. But thanks for asking. I appreciate that. I exist also to help. I exist to do a lot of things, man. I exist to live and love. Yeah, it's cheap, and the coiled stuff's pretty cheap. It's not expensive. You don't have to get 50 feet of it. You can buy it by the foot and get 15, 20 feet for 5 gallons should be pretty adequate for most hobby steels. So what's going on, Mikey? What's up, my brother? Smaller the diameter of the lint arm and piping to your worm, the faster the vapor will travel. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, you get increased vapor velocity. And right, exactly. Yep. You get the dwell times. Absolutely. And that certainly helps a lot on your copper when you get that dwell time. But surprisingly, you can distill faster even with that larger diameter. So you're moving more. It's just not at a high pressure, or you're moving as much, but it's not under pressure and moving fast. So it's as much or more moving slowly. So it's definitely better. Um, That's why I really don't like using anything less than half, say. Um, but like on a 5 gallon, the 3/8 is going to be fine. 10 gallon probably be adequate. Anything bigger than that, I definitely would go half or more. As cheap as the half is, I don't even know why they even use the 3/8. But the 5/8, if you use 5/8 or 3/4, I think the 5/8 is more for your refrigerant, and then 3/4 is more for the stick size wise. But if you can bend it, that's fine. It works perfectly. Um, but getting those coils is save you a lot of trouble if you don't have pipe benders and you don't run a risk kinking it and stuff. But if you do, you just put a union on there and keep going. It doesn't hurt anything. It might not look the best, but we don't really give a shit about looks. We just want something that works well, Unless, of course, you're a commercial, and then you have tours and you want everything to be pretty. All right, brother. Well, tune in. We're here on every Wednesday and Saturday. And I know that you said that 10 minutes ago. So I'm sorry. I'm trying to catch up. What's up? I'm glad you're here too, brother. If you got any questions, bring them on in. Yep. You definitely want to be efficient. Yeah, EC 1118. If you're going to just use one, that's definitely probably the best one, single yeast, if you're going to use it for everything. Yeah, yeah, I know. Hey, I know you ain't yelling at me. Yeah. Now, uh, what type of steel do you have, James? Is it of ever stainless? But I see you saying tri clamp, so it's you either got a football steel maybe, or you got a good beaver pot with a bulkhead tri clamp fitting, or maybe a keg steel. I'm guessing. So let me know, and we'll figure out a good way to get that vented. SAF is great. Yeah, that blue is good stuff. Now, yeah, there's some other tequila yeast that are really good, but yeah, SAF is a great yeast to use. And I think Tractor Supply sometimes sells that shit really fucking cheap, just the red box. Um, but they sell it really cheap, and it's perfectly fine yeast to use. Yeah, it works just fine. Your mother-in-law wants a limoncello, so maybe a brandy yeast. Yeah, a limoncello would be fine. I would say, what's your base spirit going to be? You gonna ferment lemons, or are you just gonna do like a neutral? Most people that do a limoncello will do a neutral, and then they'll just soak in. So if you're doing the neutral, pretty much any, I just use the EC 1118 or a brandy yeast to get different notes. Be awesome, but it depends on what your base is going to be. Quebec yeast is great. Yeah, it's yeah, a lot of people love Quebec, and getting back to the tequila, a lot of those tequila yeast prefer warmer temperatures than like a wine yeast. So a lot of times, some people wait until summer to do their tequila fermentations. That way, the outside temperatures are more conductive to that. And during the spring and fall, when it's a little cooler, they use the wine yeasts for that reason. So you can adapt the wine yeast or the yeast that you use to the ambient temperature that you ferment in. Excellent point. What's going on, Jeffrey? Yeah, I absolutely. I open up valves on mine. I've got a valve on mine specifically that I use for that. I also use it. It's got a funnel on it that I use to do some retorts and redistilling. If you have to pressurize the steel to get dents out, it's best and safest to do it in a pool. Interesting. I've never thought about that way. But yeah. Yeah, most of the time it won't like throw shrapnel. 9 times out of 10, it'll split at a solder, especially like if it's butt soldered and it's not folded. I know a lot of people do just butt soldering, which works fine, under the pressures that we use. But when it comes to, like we're talking about fixing a dent, yeah, it'll split. And if it does, it can actually literally splint and slim and fly off and send shards. Yeah, I'm glad you're too, brother. Now we'll get you fixed up. So, what are you fermenting? How did it come out, brother? So, Mike has recently tried some of this, and we spoke earlier, and it turned out very well. Different, had some floral notes that some of the other stuff they were using didn't. So they were really happy with it, and it's good stuff. So it's good to experiment, try different things, and but it's all based on opinions. It's whatever you want, and sometimes opinions vary. If we all agreed on everything and our tastes were the same, there wouldn't be so many bottles on the shelf. We are all learning, brother. If we ain't learning, we're stagnant. Was I ever a school teacher? No, brother, I wasn't. My mom was, so I guess I get that from her. And I'm not patient enough to be a school teacher. I tried with my daughter and math, and we both ended up getting frustrated because math's one of those things. It's hard till it clicks, and then so I kept trying to push her to make it click, and you know she pushed back. She's stubborn like her daddy. Yeah, and that's why I love having that. That's why I always recommend that Beaver football for a beginner, because you're immediately starting out with these larger, spools and clip tri clamps and gaskets, and it's so much better than pasting and using compression fittings and copper. It's just night and day. I've done both, and trust me, you don't want to paste, and you don't want to use compression fittings, and all of a sudden, after you use them so many times, they start leaking, and then you got paste on those, and then you got to break it down, cut it, and shorten it, and yeah, flare it. And, yeah, it gets to be a pain in the ass. Starting with a stainless steel 32-liter, 8-gallon steel tri-clamp fittings, 3/4 to 22-liter steel is thumper, and that'll work fine, brother. And copper worm and 45 gallons cooling. That sounds great, man. That Now 150 to 200. Whoa, that's huge, bro. That's big time. My biggest is 80. I think that's pretty damn big, but man, 150, 200. That's gonna be on hobby, man. But more power to you. If you plan on going commercial, that would be awesome. A great start. I know commercial distilleries here that have their license and permits and everything, and distill on 30-gallon stills. So it is nice to have a little bit bigger steel to make it worth your time and trouble. 5 and 10-gallon steels are great. Every steel is good as long as it gets in the hobby, and you can do the modifications needed sometimes to make it safe and more productive for you. But having a little bit bigger steels, because making a mash for a 5-gallon steel isn't that much less difficult than making a mash for a 20. It's just a little bit more grain ground. It's just a little bit more water boiled, but you're going through the same motion. So you're basically doing the same damn thing, but you're just using a little bit more. So adding that little bit more, and getting that little bit more product at the end is night and day. You do a 5 gallon still, you might get a jar or two of end product, end hearts that's good. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of work and a lot of time and everything just for that jar or two. Um, and then when you a lot of people immediately once they get hooked in the hobby, they turn that 5 or 10 gallon steel into a thumper, and they're buying 20s, 15 or 20, or they're using kegs or whatever. And because it's like, that was a lot of work, but I need more. I can't do that every time I want a jar. So I need to do something where I can, have some excess jars so I don't have to distill every other day to keep up with, my drinking. So I guess that all depends on how much you drink as well. But yeah, it sounds like you got a great start on it, brother. You never seem fine there. As far as tri clamp, if you haven't already done it, try inch or inch and a half. Even with an 8 gallon, using an inch um, would be a pretty big jump. And price wise on your fittings and your spools, half inch or 1.5 or 2 is probably about as cheap as anything because it's just so commonly used. So a lot of times it's cheaper to buy a inch and a half ferrule and tri clamp than it is to buy an inch one. It's just because it's so much more commonly used. Yeah, they are. They are definitely. Yeah, it's. I hated pasting and cleaning the paste off, especially if you used your rye paste and cleaning that off every time you ran and having to get it all. Couldn't leave a little bit on there left because sure enough that'd be the place that want to leak the next time you ran. But yeah, it was soaking it, letting it get wet, and getting it all off there, and it'd get hard, that rye paste. And then the compression fittings were better, but not a whole lot. Still your cap is wedged in there, but at least now you have compression fittings. But yeah, tri clamps and ferrules are definitely the way to go. Sanitary ferrules and tri clamps is undoubtedly the best. So I am caught up and got a little mail call from a buddy. Sent me some blackberry 100 proof brandy. Let's give her a taste. Very floral. Just the nose. You get it from the nose and from the first drink. Very good. Curious to find out what type of yeast was used, but that's really good. And and that's from Unky Dave and Hoosierville. Thank you, brother. That's good stuff. Very floral. Good brandy. And I'm not sure if he wants me to mention names or anything, so unless he says something, I'm not gonna. Other than Unky Dave, if you know who Unky Dave is, if you know, you know. Lisa got some too. Oh, yeah, you let the chickens peg it off. That's funny. Yeah, it's crack lamps is definitely the way to go. So, all right, I'm gonna try to backtrack a little bit, and James, we'll get back to you. So the setup that you have, the 8 gallon that you've got, is it like just a stainless pot with a flat lid, and you're adding bulk fittings with tri clamp on it? I'm guessing. Vever 30. Well, he's answering as us, but that's awesome. Vever 32 liter steel with worm. 22 liter is still 2-inch fit on thread tri-clamp. You got a tri-clamp dome and sight glass. 3/4. Okay. Yeah, 3/4 is fine. I mean, that's a lot of improvement over, the 3/8 that you had, to start with for sure. And on an 8 gallon, it's perfectly adequate. Um, yeah. All right. There's Unky Dave. Thank you, brother. Good stuff, man. Makes some good liquor. Mr. David does. So that Bever 32, that's awesome, brother. Yep. So what are you distilling over the pond there? I know in England they like to do a lot of single malts and a lot of the malt type. So you do a lot of malts over there. You like a lot of corn, daily yeast. Wow, I would not have guessed that. That's good floral notes from Dady, brother. That's good. So you treat those yeast pretty well for them to sing like that. So they singing to you, brother. You're doing it right. But got a buddy bringing his 5 gallon to meet your 18. Yeah, they'll be buddies. So, so what are you distilling, Richard or James Richardson? Flat lid. Okay, so it originally came as like a 3 pot still or a 2 pot still, and you're modifying. Absolutely, the best thing to do when you get the Bever 2 or 3 pot stills. A lot of times the gaskets on them they break really. I mean, I recommend them. I recommend the football over that because a lot of that work's done for you. It'll come with a domed lid instead of flat, so you deal with less puking with a domed lid versus flat. Um, and the dome lid on the football stills has a ferrule on there already, so it's good to go. Sometimes they're loose, so you could braise it on there if it gets a little loose because I think they're just like crimped on, and they'll spin in circles if you force them after a while. So soldering them with some good silver solder or braising them if you can get it good and hot. That'll work. Use some matte gas or whatever. But yeah, when they come naturally like that, what's going on, Scully? What's up, brother? So when they come that way, the gaskets a lot of times everybody tends to over tighten gaskets because nobody wants to leak, and they're like, the tighter I tighten it, the less chance it has of leaking, and that's not necessarily the case with some of the gaskets that they send, especially some of the hard plastic type gaskets. So sometimes just a hand tighten is all we really need, and sometimes we get a little bit crazy and overdo it a little bit, and these cheap ass gaskets on these beavers will split very easily. In which case, if they do, instead of trying to find new gaskets and just trying to make it work with what you got, make that hole bigger, get a bulkhead fitting, and the bulkhead fitting will have like a urethane um, ring gasket. And when you tighten them up, really, these you do want to tighten up real good, and it seals real well, and you won't have as much trouble, and you'll get a tri-clamp fitting on it, a ferrule with a bulkhead fitting, and put that on your lids. And in this case, I think you're going with the 3/4, which is fine for that size. It's perfectly fine. Three quarters for an 8 gallon is just fine. But like the 18, I've got an 18 and a half Bever, and I think they come in 13. Um, those, inch and a half work well. The 18 has a 2.5 inch ferrule on the top, and I just reduce it to 2, and I use 2 because 2 is very common. I get good dwell time on my copper mesh, to help remove all the sulfides we talk about, and and it helps those, especially on some of the fermentations that have more sulfides. Again, keep those yeast happy, and sometimes you can minimize those sulfides, but sometimes specific brandies and stuff. I know, like my plums and things of that nature generally have a little bit more sulfides. A lot of my dark grapes and stuff will have a little more sulfides, whether you keep them happy or not. Uh, yeah, it's having a play date. That's funny. So, having that 2 inch, gives you pretty decent dwell. But I've made some pretty interesting configurations. I've got a what I call, it's a micro distillery, and instead of years ago I invented the bypass that everybody's using today, and I also but back in the day they also had diverters, and that I didn't know about. So I do a lot of diverting today and still use the bypass for, like, on thumpers and jar rigs. But on my steels, generally I use a diverter and retort and things of that nature. And it's pretty complex. I mean, it's not like some of these big, huge distilleries, but for a home distillation unit, it's about as complex as you can get. And it does a lot of great things. I mean, it's got a deflegmator. I've got a diverter that I can just run pot still mode. I've got a diverter. I can use an inline wishbone infuser that has a drain so I can refill and infuse as I go inline. It's got a lot of unique things that I came up with, and I can distill anywhere from 120 to about 185 proof using it. I guess I could probably push that 185 a little bit if I used ice cold water in my deflegmator, and increased my column a little bit, height a little bit. Yeah, that little 5-gallon would make a perfect little thumper, wouldn't it? Sure would, if they play well together. But one things to make sure about on your bevers is, um, always make sure that the clamp, the clamp has like two little wire pieces that go in each side, and make sure that it's squeezed good and tight, and that both of those wires are inside those circles, and that you're getting a good clamp each time. Complacency can become very hazardous. And I don't know if y'all have seen Marfugel Field. He had a beaver and he got a little complacent. He wants to blame the steel, but he got a little complacent, and one of those wire spring, I guess you consider them a spring, from his clamp was out, and he didn't know it, and half of it was hanging, and he really wasn't getting a good seal on this side. And awesome, Chris. But and he just stepped out, and it always happens when you step out. So never leave your steel unattended, especially if you're using propane or open fire. Um, so he had stepped out. It was in his garage, bar garage, and he was away, and he came in at just the time to watch it explode. And along the roof line where the alcohol is lighter than the air, it was, you know, on his ceiling, just a little flame going everywhere. So he had a fire extinguisher, and that's something I always recommend to beginners as well. Get you a good fire extinguisher rated for alcohol. And glad he did it. He saved the day. But I think he got a keg still now, so you don't have as much worries about all that. But yeah, try not to leave the distilling while it's going, especially with open flames. We'll start. Oh, so you're just okay. Start with your great grandfather passed wine recipes, 1942 year barley and wine, elderberry wine, awesome. Elderflower wine, sugar beet wine, many more going to adapt to moonshine. Uh, awesome, lots of fruits. That sounds great, man. definitely stay in tune with us and let us know what you're getting ready to do, and we can help you, with, not the recipe. You got the recipes, but maybe we can help you with some of the um, things and filling in any kind of questions that you might have. At elderberry is great stuff. Elderberry pairs well with a lot of other berries. So if you want to mix like an elderberry and a blackberry, or an elderberry and blueberry, elderberry alone is great, but it also pairs well with other berries to help give them a little bit extra. Absolutely, man. That sounds awesome. And I enjoy the wine. A lot of I I did grains for probably 30, 40 years before I started doing wines. About 35 years before I even did wines and brandies. I was always just a grain guy, and just made the corn liquor and the multi-grain liquor, and that was it. That was my bag, and I wasn't much of a wine drinker. Um, and I didn't drink, I didn't make a lot of different things. I pretty much just stuck with what I knew worked, and it was easy and good stuff. But just the old whiskey. So I started getting into brandies and making wine. And of course, if you want to make a good brandy, learn to make a good wine. And so I started going to a lot of these wine sites and reading into it, and going to a lot of these places where large vineyards talk, and and instruct and help, and they talk about their processes and what they do and what they use and stuff, and went and talked to some local wineries. They were very, very extremely helpful, and just, I mean, they love talking about their craft just as much as I do, and so I got a lot of great information from them. Made some good friends. A local winery has this. They have a bunch of blackberries and blueberries, which is getting close to time for blueberries. But so they have all these fruits, and they don't want to employ people to come in and pick them, because it just increases their overhead. So what they do is they encourage you to come in and you can pick the berries, and you can keep half of what you pick. So if you pick, 5 gallons, you give them 2.5 gallons, you keep 2.5 gallons. And at the same time, you get to look over their nice selection of wines, and they'll give you a little sampy samp, and you can try some samples, and next thing you know, you're buying a little bottle here and there, and they'll invite you back and show you their whole process if you're cool, and or if they're cool and you're cool. Um, but they'll come welcome you back and show you the whole process and what they do, and you know, uh, so I made some friends at a local winery, and they helped out a lot, and helped me a lot. So I started been making wines now for about 10 to 15 years, I guess, and brandies, and started drinking a lot more wine as you get older. That the straight stuff gets a little harder on you, like that old 135 I'm drinking, that weeded Bloody Butcher sour mash. It's damn good tasting. But at 135 proof, man, it don't take much. I think it's time for a shot. Got me thirsty. David, damn it, where you at? Elderberry wine. Now, I will. Uh, Elderberry is a good berry that'll last long. Some fruits in your brandies and some fruits as wine, they don't last like grapes and some berries like elder. Um, some of your fruits tend to give you a good wine for about a year, two, three, and depending on the fruit, then they start getting bad. So not all wine improves with time. Well, not all wine improves over a long, long period of time, I should say, because it does improve up to a point, and then it starts to degrade. Actually, um, fortunately, grapes don't, and like I think elderberries. There's a few other berries that don't degrade as much, but a lot of fruits, peaches, apricots, and plums, and things like that. Um, as a wine, they just don't have that longevity. So a lot of times you'll do a primary fermentation, usually lasts a couple of weeks, and then you'll pull off all the skins, pulp, and everything. If depending on what it is, some you don't even want in there at all, and then you'll rack it off into a secondary fermenter where it's just cleared the juices and not much yeast bed and flocculence in it. And then you'll let it sit in that secondary fermentation, and then you some even rack it off again to get even more sediments out and to increase the taste, because you want to get rid of those sediments, because you don't want it sitting on a big yeast bed, because then it starts adding off flavors over a period of time. So you want to kind of get it away from that early on, and then over time, it'll mature. And certain fruits, after a year, they're prime, and up to a couple of years, excellent. After 3 years, they start getting bad. So, depending on the fruit, sometimes, long time it better. I know that sounds bad. Don't say it. I know what you're thinking, dirty minded people. Uh, a long time. So sometimes a long time is good with your wines, with your fruits, some of your fruits. Yeah, they've got they you have a press that um, you can compress it through paper, and that's a nice press to have. That's pretty expensive. Um, I found the best way, just be patient. Just let that shit clear. I have used clearing agents. I mean, something called finning agents. Some people use egg whites, some rice hulls. The outfit that I'll go to and visit with, he likes using rice hulls to help. And but me, I've always found it mine clear out real well. Um, I don't use the clearing stuff that some of the turbo yeast comes with clearing stuff, and they've got different finning agents and different clear, but I found just patience, just letting it sit in that fermenter over time, and just racking it off once you get a yeast bottom. And racking it is basically just siphoning it off. So you'll lower that tube, that siphon tube in there right above the yeast bed. And if it sucks a little yeast, just raise it up a little bit. It's not going to hurt anything, just to get a touch, and just hold it there. And until it gets, and then, if you have to tilt the fermenter over a little bit so you can get some depth, just don't suck up a bunch of those. And you can repeat the racking process if you do happen to get a little bit. It's not going to hurt. You don't want a lot. Kind of defeats the purpose. But I've never had issues with any of my brandies clearing. I've done everything from bananas, a lot of hellacious ones. So, but but that's different from like a grain with some oats or some wheat or something that gets gummy and milky. Those I just run that way. They don't get clear, perfectly clear like a wine will. Um, yeah, yeah, it's grapes work well over the long haul. I mean, some of the grape wines, 100-year old, and but if you were to do 100-year old with like a cherry, um, ugh, or a plum, 100-year-old plum wine, it'd be horrible. They just don't do well over time. And there are a lot of charts and stuff. I'm the chart man. I'll find that chart. Um, I have seen it, but there are a lot of fruits that in charts that'll give you, the longevity of fruits in a wine, and how long you can expect it to stay fresh. And best by date. Actually, some of do have a best by date, so you could actually label some of your jars, label when it was made. That way you can look and see um, after, and you can judge for yourself, and take some of that uh, plum wine, into year 3 and 4 and 5, and compare that with some of your younger, with your 1 year stuff. And also in winemaking, you'll also learn something that you don't typically do in like making, grain, is you actually physically stop fermentation while it's fermenting. So while it's fermenting and you got your hydrometer in there and you're getting a 1.005 or 010, and it's still got some sweetness to it. Sometimes that at that point you'll want to stop fermentation. So to stop fermentation, you'll use Camden tablets or potassium metabisulfate, and that'll kill the yeast off. It doesn't stress them real bad. It just severs the head, so they really don't have a lot of time to suffer and stress and give off some bad flavors. It's just like taking an animal. You know, when you take an animal cleanly, it doesn't promote a lot of those fear hormones and stuff. And if you kill that yeast quickly, they don't produce bad off flavors either. Strange. It's wild how these things work. Similarly, in the wild, animal kingdom and all the way down into microbes. And it's also interesting how it correlates to how we intake sugars and break them down and use them. But so potassium metabisulfate will just kill them dead, and sometimes people will use potassium sulfate. Let me see. So sometimes using potassium sulfate um, will will I'm sorry, potassium sorbate will neutralize the yeast. So it doesn't kill them. It just makes it to where they can't reproduce. And so eventually they just live out their lives naturally and they die of natural causes. And, they don't stress, they just die, and it's not so bad. But so, in winemaking, sometimes if you want a little bit of a sweeter wine, you have to do that. Or you can, what's the process, heating it up, like pasteurization. You can pasteurize your wine, heat it up, and kill your yeast that way. And then, post sweeten, sweeten it up after you kill your yeast that way. It's not the best way to do it. The heating it up kind of can affect the flavors. A lot of cheaper wines do it that way. But yeah, you want to kill the yeast off, or and that's another reason they gauge the amount of yeast that they use, and they don't want a lot of yeast towards the end of fermentation. Um, so they definitely don't want to oxidize and stir it up and promote growth of and promote breeding of yeast. That's one of the many reasons that we use airlocks and don't disturb the cap after so many days is we really don't want to encourage more breeding of yeast. Because especially if we want a little bit of a sweeter yeast, we can use less potassium metabisulfate or less potassium sorbate, and kind of kill off all the yeast or let them die and not breed, and then you can add some sweetening, post sweetening. Um, if it's not sweet enough, you can add some sweetener back in there, some sugars, dextrose, whatever you want to add. Simple inverted sugars all work great, and that way you don't have to worry about the process beginning again. We've all made the mistake in winemaking. Don't do it. Of putting a little in there to sweeten it up and then corking it and figuring, oh, and then because if you don't kill your yeast off and you put that little bit of sugar back in there, fermentation starts again and CO2 starts giving off again. And if you got that sucker cork, guess what happens? Yep, you got a mess. So that's something that you don't want to deal with either, because yeah, I've popped a few corks in my days, and it's a mess. It's a fucking mess. But sometimes in making champagne, that's how they make a lot of champagne. They'll put a little touch of yeast in there when it's done, and that's why they put those cages on there to hold those corks in. So they cage it up and keep it from keeping that cork from blowing off. I've not had any. I've not caged any, but I've not had any of my strawberry champagne do that to me. But it's uh, it's pretty good. Actually, it's starting to get a little age on it. I'm gonna have to make some more. And another thing, when your wines do get a little bit dated and stale and not as good anymore, you can always dump them back in that fermenter and redistill them. Or I mean, in your boiler and redistill them. So just dump those bottles back in and redistill and kind of refreshes things. So and you can turn that wine into brandy, and That works too. Yeah, I've made some champagne, man. I've got a little strawberry champagne that I guess to some people I'm known for. I've got some gals at a bar that save me wine bottles and bottles, and they uh, every trip or two, and I go in there, I'll take them a bottle of this strawberry champagne, and it's real super dry. It's not sweet. This is super dry strawberry champagne, and I told them how low calorie it was because there's no sugar in it. It's dry, fermented dry as fuck. It's a brute, and it's really bubbly, and it's got a lot of strawberry flavor. It's like strawberry. If you like eating strawberry without dumping sugar on it and eating it, you will like it. If you're one of those that has to have sugar on it to eat them, probably not so much. If you don't like dry, probably not. But I stress how low sugar it is, and they love it, man. They dig it, and they're into it. So they're happy to see me, and they save me wine bottles. Um, I don't know if any of you guys have ever bought wine bottles. They get very expensive, and every batch of wine you use, every time you do 5 gallons of wine, that's 25 bottles. So if you're paying $2 or $3 a bottle, that can get pretty expensive pretty fucking quick. So moonshine, as long as you keep a cap on it, man, it'll last forever. I mean, they found brandies and liquors in the bottom of the sea from sunken ships. They bring them up, and they're still damn good. So as long as you keep them sealed, and they'll essentially last forever, especially the higher proof stuff. Some of your brandies, probably not the best example to use, but some wines and brandies, they won't keep as long. Especially like the lower proof, you get your 40 to 60 proof brandies. Not as much alcohol content in those, a lot more fruit content, and over a long period of time, bad things can start happening. But like in a jar, a bottle of vodka or anything 100 proof, or 90, 80, 90, 100 proof, yeah, that's going to last pretty much indefinitely. St. Pauli girl bottles, yep. But that's the ones with the little cap that you can has like a little rubber gasket on it. I'm trying to Grolsch. Did Grolsch come with those? I used to use those two, and I think it was a Grolsch that came with it. I've got some over there. I have to look at it. But those were the best to make for beer and wine ever. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, those were true. I think Grolsch made those. Um, had the metal locks and like the ceramic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are very very popular amongst beer makers and winemakers. So definitely never throw those bottles away. They're very very popular. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Your whiskey will last as long as it's not getting air to it. It'll last forever and ever. If it's getting air to it, like in a barrel, you'll get some angel cut. You'll get some evaporation. But and really in a barrel, after a certain period of time, it can over oak. So these people say, "Oh, I've got some 30-year-old that's been in the barrel for 30 years." I don't know if that's going to be that great. Prove me wrong. If you got some good old 30-year bourbon, prove me wrong. Uh, but I think there's probably a time limit too to even barrel aging. Everybody thinks that it's forever, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. It may. I've just never had anything that's been in a barrel for that many years. I've had some, I don't know, some maybe 15, 14, 15, and those are good. They get really dark. Um, but at the same time, I think that, there can be a point where it's starting to get over oaked. Pop tops, yeah, yeah. I've got some Grolsch that I use. I've never done much beer making. I have, of course, when in the process of making, multigrain mashes for spirits. I have drank quite a bit of the beer, just tasting it as it works along. And, of course, you don't want to drink too much of that. You get the runs, but um, it's awful damn good. And I'm not a big beer drinker. I always like Boilermakers because I'm a whiskey freak. I love bourbons and whiskeys. Yeah, yeah. I just can't imagine the taste of a 30-year-old, that's been in a barrel that long. It's just, well, I guess, some swear by it. So I'd have to, my personally, I would think it'd be over. But like I say, if you've got some 30-year-old and it's that good, prove me wrong, invite me over and we'll sit and talk about it. We may talk about it through that whole bottle. Homemade beer that's 12. Yeah, beer probably not the best for aging either. But, you know, I've never been much of a beer maker or drinker, so I'm not real proficient on that. I've never had a lot of old beer, aged beer. I'm just not a big beer. Actually, I will say when I went overseas, when I was in Europe, um, did dig the dark beers and some of their higher proof, beers and stuff that they made over there, especially the dark stuff. Um, I like that. I highly preferred that to like a light blonde American beer that basically is just water compared to those. But yeah, I did like some of those dark, um, warm room temperature beers. They were like 12, 16% ABV and were really, and I guess stout is the term. I mean, I'm not a big beer guy, so I don't know all the beer terminologies. Um, I wouldn't use any fruit at all. I'll be straight up with you, Scott. If you've got a good blue corn, I would use maybe another grain with it. I like wheat and oats, um, corn, oats, and barley. I mean, you can't beat a little wheat in there with it. It makes it awesome. If you like a little spice, little rye to go with it. But um, I'm not the biggest fan. I mean, everybody's different. A lot of people like mountain brandy, where they get a corn base and then add fruit to it. But like, I just can't imagine. I've not tried a corn peach. I will say like an apple rye is a good thing. So I don't really, that's I guess an apple brand or a mountain brandy where it's got fruit and grain. An apple rye makes a damn good drink. But like a corn peach, I mean, to me, that's just kind of conflicting. Maybe some people may love it. It's just opinion. It's just strictly an opinion. Some people may love it, dig it, say it's the best shit ever. I mean, I might even after I try it, but I've never tried it. But yeah, the blue corn is so good. I would be afraid it would get lost with the fruit, and it might get, maybe overpowered. So I would, I like cob, corn oats, and barley. I use oats, a lot of oats. I like the softness and the vanilla notes and the softness that the oats give. Um, I like a raisin, but a different flavor, softness wise. But I also like wheat. I like the sweetness that a wheat adds, a little grassy sweetness to maybe some of the corn's earthiness. Um, Rye, I'm kind of okay on rye. I used to not like it when I was younger, but I think my palate's changed a little bit, and I kind of don't mind a little bit of rye. Add a little pepper, spicy notes to it. Not bad. But I would be afraid to, if you're going to do a Mount Brandy, just do it with like maybe a yellow dent and try it first, because I'd hate to waste a good heirloom, expensive heirloom corn on something that really wasn't going to be good anyway. But yeah, I'm kind of weary of blue. I love blue. Blue corn's awesome. Blue Hopi, Ohio blue, great corn, probably one of the best. So yeah, I would definitely do that with some other grains and put it on some wood. I've got Scots in my family. Yep. See, my dad's mom's dad. No, wait, my dad's mom. No, maybe it's her grandfather. It was Scott, because Laura Scott McCoy. She was a McCoy, so by birth, and Scott was her middle name from, I guess, her mom. Yeah. So my dad's mom's mom was a Scott. Yeah. Yeah, and she was one of the McCoys from the Hatfield McCoy feud. If y'all have ever read anything about that, that's I have a direct descendant into that with my grandmother on my dad's side. She was born just a little bit after that happened. She was born in 1903, maybe, and that happened in the late 1800s. So she heard a lot about it. And yeah, I grew up in Pikeville, Pike County, Eastern Kentucky, where all that happened. So yeah, I'm a feuding McCoy, the real McCoy. Yep, those Scots, pretty good people. No, 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 I don't. I don't. That's long gone. They do some reenactments, and there's a Hatfield McCoy uh, graveyard that a lot of people go to. There's James Hatfield. He is a distiller, and they do some Hatfield McCoy liquor. But no, there's no animosity. It's oh, actually, it was something that my family was embarrassed of and didn't talk about, but now it's kind of cool to talk about. So it was funny how those things change. It's kind of like moonshining and distilling and making your own. It kind of used to be the same way. It's something a lot of people didn't talk about, especially if it was your way of living. You didn't want the word to get out, and so it was just something that a lot of people didn't talk about, and it wasn't something to be as proud of as it is today. Um, but yeah, things have changed. A 4-year-old me, honey doesn't go bad. So, you know, I would say honey would probably, like a mead would last longer than like some of the grains that you may have in some of the beers. But malt liquor beer with fruit, not for me, brother. JM, blue corn, wheat, raisin bran. That'd work. Jimmy Red and apples, all spring. That's good. That sounds like a good combination. Yeah. But like a peach, I just can't imagine corn and peach. That doesn't really do a lot for me. But like apples and rye, or some earthy Jimmy Red with some apples, be some interesting flavor. But like just corn and peach. I always think that one because I do a lot of peach brandies, and I think corn and peach, or maybe even corn with my plum, my slivovich. I don't think that would be very good either. But like, yeah, with a Jimmy Red and an apple, I think apple would tends to go with a lot of the grains, because an apple rye would be good. Maybe even an apple wheat. You know, so yeah. y'all tried any of the Oaxacan green corn yet? It's supposed to be really interesting. And Amanda Palmer, another corn that's really interesting. It's a combination of a lot of different corns. Yeah, yeah, honey lasts forever. Have y'all heard of the mad honey they got going around? So you can take a small spoonful of this mad honey, and supposedly, you get a little bit of trippy buzz from it. Have y'all heard about that? I guess I'm not sure if it's Africanized honey or from South America. I'm sure somebody will know. I haven't really read up much on it, but I've heard a little bit about the mad honey. We got any mad honey fans in here that know a little bit about it? Yeah, I'd try a little spoonful. I wouldn't mind. I definitely want to start small and work my way up. And mash direct from farm brewers, wheat and barley. So they good matter up in May. Yeah, you know, thing about mad honey is from Nepal. Good to know. Nepalese. So they make good mad honey and good hash from Nepal. Nepalese. Back in the old days, man, that's some of the best hash going. Oaxacan green. It's a little harder to find, but it's gaining popularity. So yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, I think Nepal and along that same border there, in China, I'm sure those bees don't stop at the border, do they? So yeah, man, I'd try some of that. I think you can order it. I think it's legal to order. Probably be a good idea to get it for the you know who is it that regulates that Food and Drug Administration. I guess probably want to get some before the FDA starts flexing. So Farmers Brewer wheat and barley. Yep, those are awesome. Especially malted. You want to make sure that they're malted. That definitely improves them as well, and gives them a diastatic power and helps convert all those starches. So you don't have to use as much amylase or any if you get enough. So James, have you read and learned all about converting the grains, um, and getting gelatinizing the grains and getting the starches out of them, and then converting those starches into with amylase, different types of amylase, both endogenic, which comes from your malted grains, and exogenic, which comes in the form of a liquid uh, amylase that'll break those down. Have you studied much about that yet, or just getting into it? This is the place to ask your questions on that. We can take you step by step. Actually, I'm working on a good step by step for a multigrain. Um, and if you follow the instructions to a T, you will make a damn good liquor. As long as you follow it. It's like cooking and following the recipe and cooking. I'm going to give you every step. And if you follow every step to the T, don't eliminate stuff, and don't say, I tried that and it tasted like shit. And I'm like, well, did you deviate from it? Well, now I didn't use this. I used this instead. And instead of using this, I did it. I get that. And I'm like, well, then you didn't follow the fucking recipes. I'm sorry. Blame me. That happens. And it kind of pisses you off because take the time and trouble to break it all down. And then they start changing things, but I do want you to change things, but try it this way first, and then make it yours, change things. So, I think if it really, I add a little bit more wheat, it might be a little sweeter. I might prefer that. And absolutely. So fine tune it, but Don't just eliminate liquid high temp amylase and use powder at 190, and expect it to work. It's just no, follow the instructions, especially when you're first getting started, and yeah, we'll have you making some really good stuff. And I want to do some just simple corn. I'm going to do some simple sugar wash for first timers. Yeah, and Philbilly, man who makes all this possible. We stream from the platform. We're our part of the militia. He's head of the militia. I'm an admin in the militia, and you can go to Philbilly's. You can look through his videos. He's got tons of recipes, tons of how tos. Great source of information, and it's great to see it in a video. Um, for a lot of people, it's easier to replicate and do when you see somebody else do it than just to read. So I like having videos and watching, and doing it that way as well. So it definitely helps. Randy Dowdy with no thumper. Every single thing I've ever run has been hotter than hot. Pear, wheat, corn, barley, all kinds of combinations. Usually, using a thumper makes it even hotter because basically what a thumper is doing, it's giving it a second distill, but it's also taking water and flavor out. So generally, it's up in the proof, which tends to make it hotter. But there's certainly nothing wrong with doing a stripping run and doing a second run a little bit lower and slower to improve the product. Maybe slow down, and maybe you're going a bit too hot too fast. What's your drip rate, Randy? I mean, what size steel are you running, and what kind of drip or trickle do you have coming off the condenser? That makes that'll make a difference too. Are you converting the grains, or are you adding sugar to your grains? That definitely makes a difference. So if we're doing all grains and we're using malts and we're doing a lot of conversion, that'll tend to make it a little smoother. Like we talked about earlier, throwing some raisins in there. Also, when it first comes off the tap, if you just put it in the jar and put like a cheesecloth over it and just screw your ring on and use that cheesecloth just to keep the bugs and shit out of it, and let it breathe, what happens is a lot of your higher volatile alcohols that tend to make it hot tasting will evaporate off first. So if you just leave it that way for a day, a lot of that will evaporate off, and you'll get a little bit smoother. Then you can cheat. I don't like using the glycerins, but you can use glycerins to make it smoother. I personally don't do that. I don't, recommend it, but a lot of people do. And aside from getting the shits, it does make it smoother, but it will, cause you a little diarrhea. So that's one of the reasons I don't do it, but it's cheating. But adding oats to your grain bill will help soften it, and adding some raisins pre and post will help soften it, and letting it breathe. And if you want to speed up that breathing, you can certainly add a fish bubbler, a fish tank bubbler with some silicone tubing going in. That silicone doesn't get degraded by your liquor, and you won't taste it. And let it bubble, and that speeds up the process. If you don't want to just let it sit for a day or two, you can certainly bubble it and get a lot of those higher volatile alcohols to evaporate first before the ethanol does. You will lose a little ethanol, but there's a lot of things to do like that. I know some people run it through like a filter, um, a Brita or something like that, and that helps. I would tend to just pour it over some charcoal, if you don't mind a little bit of flavor being reduced. Some of those fusel oils, if you get a little bit into your tails, it'll help take some of those out. Yeah, a very, very small temperature range for your powdered amylase, like 150 to 60, if I'm not mistaken, is your range for powdered amylase, and you don't want to vary from that. High temp HTL high temp liquid is basically 180, 90, all the way down to probably 160. So there's a lot wider range for the HTL than just the powdered, and you get a little bit better conversion. The powder I use when I use, and I'm using it to get rid of it because I like the liquid so much better. But I'll use the powdered when I do like a multi-grain that I'm using malts with enough diastatic on their own. Excuse me, a little froggy. So, like if I'm doing an all grain and I'm using malted grains and I have plenty diastatic power, I will still, when I have the corn at 160, I'm still going to put in some of that powder and let it rest at 160 for a good long time and let that work, just to make sure that I get all the starches broken down that I can. And then, of course, when I add the malted barley and malted rye, malted wheat, whatever, um, those will also give more alpha, natural endogenic. They call it endogenic because it's coming from the actual grain itself, and it's not an exogenic source. So it will also have the alpha in there that'll break down any more that don't get broken down from the powder because it's not the most efficient. And then, of course, the beta amylase that's naturally in the uh, the malted grains will chop those up into fermentables. But I still do add a little bit of liquid glucose when I get further down to yeast bitching temps. I'll add the glucose and I'll let it sit a day and work a day, maybe two. I don't get in a rush because that's the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, with any of this, whether it be wine, beer, whiskey, anything, is getting in a hurry and trying to get things done quicker. You can't make it age faster, better. There's you can't replace time for a lot of this stuff. So, get back to the grains, using those, and then I'll add a little glucose and let that work a day or two, and that way I get really really good conversions. And when I distill those, I don't get a lot of burn at all or any burn at all. It's very, very, very smooth, good stuff. Oats help a lot. I love oats. I'll use them if I just do corn alone. I don't even consider it a second grain anymore. I just always throw a few handfuls in, just to help soften things up, regardless of what I'm doing, except brandies, of course. Um, so that there's different little things like that you can help that soften it up. Running it, multi runs, running it that second time or that third time, just don't scorch it, and you can keep running it. And I do a lot of 2x and 3x distillations. I do cognac type redistillations, and I get a really good smooth product from doing those. So, um, good questions, guys. Right? Yeah, you got to hold that temp to gelatinize, and that's why I always preach, don't use all your water at once when you're doing the steep method. Use 3/4 of the water, keep a fourth there to keep dumping in little by little, keep it, mixed, and keep that temperature, because you want to, at 190 to 200, 210, you need to have it at that temperature for like 90 minutes. Now you can do lower temperatures, but you have to add a lot of time to it. So a little bit lower temperature means a lot longer time. So then, yeah, you can I do kind of rush that. I guess I don't do a long gelatinization. I generally do a steep, and I'll just take 200, 210-degree water, and I'll pour it um, in my fermenter. I'll maybe do half, and then I'll start adding grains to that, stirring with my little mud mixer and drill, constantly adding the grain. When it starts getting thick and cooling off a little bit, I'll add a little bit more of that water, hot boiling water, and keep adding my grain and keep adding water, grain, water, grain, water, grain, until I'm out of the grains, I'm not real slowly. And I'll stir it real good. I'll let it sit. I'll maintain that temperature by adding a little bit of water, stirring it, to keep that 190 plus, up for 90 minutes at least, and maybe even 2 hours. Depends on the corn. Not all corn gelatinizes at the same rate, but it's a hydrolyzation. You're getting all that starch out of the grain with that high temperature water, and gelatinizing it. And then if you're using powder, you used up all your water at this point, and you just let it cool. But if you want to hold 5 gallons out and you're using powdered, you can take 5 gallons of cold water and dump on it to get it down to 160 quicker because it's slow. It takes a while to go from 190 to 160. And if you don't want to sit there for hours to waiting and waiting and waiting, sometimes because I use a um, insulated fermenter, so it holds those temperatures better. But sometimes that's a curse if you don't have a chiller. If you got a chiller, you do beer, you can drop that chiller in there and bring it down to 160, and then throw your powder in and hold that temp. Um, and then you got your protein rest if you like beer, true beer maker, to do those to keep the haze down. But there's a saccharification range in my charts that I always love showing. Um, there is a saccharification range, and let me pull up this up real quickly. I'm never where I'm going to be on these things here. Let's see. Where are you? Where are you? Shit, let me go to the other file here. I keep saying I'm going to put all these in one, and I never do. I've got so much shit going on in my life. I don't have time. A lot of times, let's see, where's that? Show. It's not in pictures. It's in documents, distilling, and best info. Here we go. Here, this is your saccharification range. Common. You've heard of saccharin. This is saccharification. That's just creating sugars. Is where it converts from starch into more basic sugars, simple sugars. So this is a rest range. You always want to hold it from 55 to 45. So you want to rest and hold it at this range for a little longer. You don't want to just use a chiller and go from here, pitching your alpha, stirring it, and then immediately going to 130 some to add your malt, your barley, or something like that. So within this range here, of course, your barley malt's here. But like if you have an oats or a rye, malted rye will be a little higher. But like your barley malt, so you want to hold from 155, and then when it gets to like 150, you can add that 152 or whatever. You can add that barley malt in there and hold that temperature for a long time, and you'll get a really improved conversion by resting during these saccharification range. After I'm drinking, I have trouble saying that in a few other words, but that's why this chart's great. It tells you the upper limits before you start denaturing the enzymes. So with your barley malt, you get a bunch above 155. It activates quicker, but it'll start degrading quicker as well. So that's a pretty good time at 155 to add your barley malt and hold that temp in this range right here, because you get too low and it doesn't convert anymore, so it loses efficacy. So holding it in this range for a saccharification, and to not denature or get so low that you're not getting good enzymatic action. And that's with your beta and alpha that's contained in that barley malt. But you can also add some glucose, which does the same thing as your beta amylase. And by further debranching what your alpha breaks up, we talked about last week how your long chains of amylose and then your branch amylopectins, those the two different types of starches. It debranches and breaks those down, but they're not fermentable sugars for the most part. So to further break those down, we depend on the enzymes from our endogenic enzymes from our malts, or exogenous enzymes from the liquid glucose that you can add later. So love it. Interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean, everything is going to be hot, and the proof, it has a lot to do with proof. And white dog is not, it's not a finished spirit. When you take a white dog and you put it in a barrel, even if it comes out the same proof as it went in, it's smoother. And you've got a lot of processes. The barrel works on it and gives it tannins, but there's also natural processes occurring that would happen even if it's in a jar. Esterification and other things, turning fats into flavors. So, and that's alcohol and fats combine and esterify and can create some really good, interesting flavor notes. Yeah, exactly, Levi. It depends on what kind of proof you're dealing with. Okay, cool. Just a drip, no stream. Awesome. That's the way you want it. 15 gallons. A good drip. Um, you'll be fine. On a strip and run, it can actually be the smallest of fast drip to just a trickle and then back to a fast drip, just at that rate, kind of like you do in your sink at home. When you turn it up and down, you can turn it down just to where it's a finest stream before it drips, maybe the size of a pencil lead. When you start getting to 20 gallons, to 30 gallons, you can do a little stream like that. But anything less than that, pretty much a good fast drip is fine. I've seen people say when we tell people to do it low and slow, we do that so people don't puke and don't scorch. And people tend to run it as hot as fucking can and wide open and try to go just as fast as possible. And we teach a lot of beginners low and slow to prevent that. But a lot of people take that low and slow to extremes, and they're like, I've been waiting 12 hours and I still don't have a drip. And it's like, no, not that low, not that slow. So there's extremes. So best thing to do is kind of crank your heat up until you get a drip, and then adjust your heat down. As long as you're not scorching, you can adjust it down to a good steady drip that's good for your size pot. Now, some of these pots, you get up to 100 gallons. You got a pretty good stream coming out. You get up to a 500 gallon. It's like a freaking. It's more than a garden hose shooting out of there, man. So it just depends on the size of the steel to what size drip you're going to have. Absolutely, a lot of us preppers in here, brother. Absolutely, and keeping corn to grow for food and for making liquor, and of course we know that you know you need alcohol to treat wounds, and it's good astringent. It's good for a lot of things. It's good to drink. It's good for wounds. It's good for making your tinctures and things of that nature. So there's a lot of uses. And hand sanitizer, of course, got to have that good hand sanitizer at home, right? So yeah, there's a lot of good uses for it, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could definitely be with your cuts if you get a little bit of acetone and some of your higher, more volatile alcohols in there. That's why I try to tell a lot of beginners that aren't really good at making cuts to let it breathe a while, because a lot of those methanol and a lot of those higher alcohols will evaporate off. But yeah, making good cuts is probably the hardest thing for beginners to learn. We do generally have some 50 milliliters per gallon or whatever rule, but you just can't use those, because especially like in brandies, you're going to have a lot more heads than you would say in like a sugar shine. In a sugar shine you have far less, and grains are kind of in the middle, and it all varies depending on the grains, the fruits, and all that. So there's no set amount, per gallon, but there are ranges, that you can kind of go by. But using small jars, when it's coming off, just depend on the size of your steel. So if you have a big steel, use quart jars, because that'd be a small jar if you got a 30-gallon steel. But if you got a 5 or a 10-gallon steel, quart is too big, to start out with. So use pints. And especially when you're starting to question, maybe am I getting close to hearts? You can start with quarts, and then when you get to where you think the hearts are starting, use pints, and use pints, and then when you're for sure in your hearts, you can go back to a quart, and then when you think, oh, it's starting to drop in proof, I think I'm getting close to tails, then you can use pints again. If you don't have enough pints just to use straight across, it's best just to use the same ones until you get a little more experience, and then you can start tasting them. When you taste them, don't start at the headsy side, start at the tailsy side, because and don't drink while you're doing this. If you smell it coming off, you can smell it, and you maybe taste a tad, but if you do get those heads in your mouth, it's hard to cleanse that palate to for me, to really taste when the true heart's coming, when the true tail's come. So if you separate everything out just by jars, and you got it broken down, you say you've got 10 jars, and the first three of that 10's probably going to be headsy. The next four are going to be probably heartsy, and then the last three are going to be tailsy, depending on how far you run down. But 30, 40, 30, kind of is a decent range to guess at. And then start at your tails and start smelling the very bottom, and say, oh, wow, that's definitely, I can see what they talk about when they talk about wet dog or musty, because I'm definitely, getting that by smelling it. And get some on your fingers and rub it. It's not going to hurt you. Get some on your fingers and rub your fingers, and get it volatile, get it working, and it evaporates faster when you do that. And you can feel if it's oily, and smell it, and then go to the next jar, taste a little bit, smell it, it's still a little musty, but not as bad. Yeah, I can see what they're talking about. Or if you go to the sweet water and you go to the next jar up, it may be musty as hell. And then you'll get to one, you're like, your fingers will feel cleaner. They won't be as oily, and they start dragging, like your hair does when it's really clean, squeaky, kind of squeaky feeling, and your fingers don't just glide, you can tell a little bit difference and taste it. Oh, I can definitely taste that. That's definitely better. I'm not getting that wet cardboard, musty, wet dog, odor, damp, odor. It's definitely a little better. So you're right at the cusp of hearts and tails. And then you can go further over to your left, and oh, those are good. That's sweet. I can definitely tell. So keep that last bit of tails in that last jar, and save those to rerun. And the very bottom jar, if you take it to sweet waters, those are good for proofing. But back to your hearts. Okay, this is great, man. This is sweet. Oh yeah, this one's sweet too. This one's sweet. Oh, this one is sweet, but getting a little bit of a funny taste. Yeah, I can see where the acetone fingernail polish remover. Yeah, let's try the next one. Oh yeah, that's definitely bitter. Yeah, that's got the acetone. So from there on over, forget about it, right? I don't rerun them. I don't do all faints with them. I don't care if I'm wasting alcohol. I'm not going to deal with those again. So everybody's got their own ways of doing it. I'm not saying there's a right and wrong way, but for me, I am not going to reintroduce acetone and all the methanol and all that shit back into another distillate so I can try to cut it out again. I know there's good ethanol in there. I'm not going to go to the extremes of getting it out. So those become grass killer, glass cleaner. I keep some in my contact jar. I'll put a little blue finger food coloring in there, so I know not to drink it, but it looks just like like what's the glass cleaner that always looks blue. So put a little little food coloring in there, so it's not something you want to drink, and people see it and they don't think that, and you can use it in your spray bottle. And it works great for cleaning glass, cleaning, your glass top stoves, great for cleaning metal before you weld. There's lots and lots, tons of uses. Maybe one night we'll have a good time coming up with thousands of uses for, heads. Absolutely throw your copper mesh in the pipes. But once you learn to do the cuts, you won't have to go to the extreme in the small jars, basically smelling it when it comes off your tap. You just keep putting your fingers in there and smell it. And you'll smell it, and you'll be like, okay, those are the hearts. I'm into the hearts now. And then when you get to the tails, you'll see it beading on the surface, and yeah, it's definitely starting to get a little oily. I can smell those fusel oils. And then, collect those tails, especially if you're sour mashing, because you don't want your back set to have a lot of alcohol, so you got to run it out of there. And those tails do contain a lot of ethanol that you can separate from the damp, dungy smell very easily in future runs. And it's a lot easier to separate that dungy smell, that damp, wet dog, wet cardboard, whatever kind of smell, whatever you want to call it. It's easier to separate that from the ethanol in your tails than it would be ethanol from acetone in your heads. I don't care what anybody says. That's just me. But those tails I'll save, and you can do an all tails run, or you can put them in your thumper. It increases your volume, and yeah, it will increase the amount of tails that you have the next time. And yes, there is um, still going to be methanol and four shots in your tails. Just they're in lesser amounts, but they're going to be all the way through your distillation. It just decreases unless you fractionally distill, which you're not doing on a pot still. So save those tails, and especially if you're doing a sour mash, so your back set doesn't have a high proof and kill your yeast when you dump it in there. And you'll have increased production if you add those tails to your pot the next time you run. You'll see an increase in your ethanol production, and that's what we want. And it's good ethanol. It'll separate well for you, and it'll increase your efficiency and productivity. I've noticed right before it turns to tail, it will give off an almost a neutral taste, almost like water, right? It's not tails yet, but has no strong taste. Yeah, and you can find if you really um, do small amounts, even in your heads, you can find some sweetness. If you really want to make really small micro cuts in like shot glasses, if you try a different shot, there are actually some esters and stuff that'll come off that have some sweetness if you can isolate them. Easier to do if you have a bigger still though. On smaller stills, it's almost impossible to get those cuts. But if you have a really big still, you can isolate some really interesting flavor even from some of your heads, but not the fours. I just dump those. But yeah, and get to Sweetwater. Phil Billy did an excellent video on Sweetwater. I've talked about it, and I guess he's put old Santa to the test, and he did a video and ran and did a run and ran it all the way down to I think 20. Probably should have gone to 10, but he ran it down to 20, and he tasted each, and he used it to proof with, and he agreed. It does maintain some flavor, and it adds flavor to the proof, because if you're adding water to liquor, you're adding pretty much a very nothing. Water is diluting the liquor. If you add what's called a sweet water that has like 20 proof, you're adding a lot of flavors from the liquor, but you're also adding 20 proof liquor. So you're going to get, 10% more production. So you're going to get more alcohol in the long run, and it won't dilute the flavors. So you're not um, losing flavor, you're maintaining it. So if you dilute with water, you're losing flavor. If you proof with the sweet water, you're maintaining it, and you also will have a little bit more alcohol as well as a bonus. So, and if you sour mash, you definitely want to run a lot of that alcohol out of your back set, because you don't want to add a back set with a lot of alcohol into your sour mash, or it'll kill everything in there, and it'll kind of defeat the purpose there too. And you'll have to add more yeast because you'll kill it off. 18-gallon is a stripper. Blender on top. Yep, yep, that'll work. Yeah, the we call it a milkshake type, and it's a different condenser, and it produces, I think, higher proof if I'm not mistaken, but it's just a different way of doing it. Um, Nothing wrong with them. It's just different. I prefer the footballs. I like the football because you can pack that football with, we talk about marbles. You can put your rashing rings in there. I put my copper mesh in there, and you can run it into the canister filter that they use is really good because you can force as cold water in there as you want to, and increase circulation and maintain a pretty constant temperature. Whereas if you have an open flake or worm box, flake stand, or barrel, or whatever you use, bucket for your worm, if it has an open top, of course, you can only allow so much water to go in before it overflows. And then you have to increase the pipe size coming out to, if you want to increase the flow rate, right? Beyond a certain point. But with a contained worm, um, as much as you force in is being forced out, so you can get a lot more volume flow. So sometimes those canisters work pretty well. Mine had a negative slope to it that caused some smearing, but I just use, I got a pretty efficient shotgun condenser that I use. But I'm definitely going to be putting together a worm, um, and it's going to be, pretty good size, 5/8 coil. Did a 4 corn mash the other day that I added 17% malted wheat and 5% malted rye. That'll be awesome. Malted wheat has as high or a higher diastatic power as barley. So a 17% will be plenty percent, I can tell you. Should be just fine. 17 and 5 gives you 23. So you should be fine. If you have a little liquid high temp, use a fraction of what you normally would, but throw a little bit in there early on. Helps make your mash more manageable. You don't really need it, but it helps thin it out sooner at the higher temperatures, makes stirring it easier and dealing with it a little easier. So what's going on, Joseph? So that helps out a lot too. But your diastatic should be fine with that if the malting process turned out real well. Um, there is, times when you malt that you want to stop the malt. Um, Basically, the malting process, you start with, a basic. Let's just use corn for example. Inside a corn kernel, you'll have most of your starches are locked, and they're locked. It's an endosperm basically, and that it's locked in there. And when you gelatinize it, you're basically opening it up. And of course, when you crack it, you're opening it up. But when you use that heat, it activates and it'll break up a lot of these carbs. That's the endosperm, and it breaks those up and it gelatinizes them. And there's also amylase inside there, but usually when you cook it at that higher temp, you're denaturing all the amylase in it, right? So you want to use a little high temp to thin those out, even if you're going to use the malts that have enough diastatic, just to make it a little easier to work with. So you don't need as much, but yeah, it's a good idea to use those. And I'll show you. Kind of talked myself in a circle there. I'm gonna have to read, but yeah, you should be fine with those. And if you use a little bit of the high temp and a little bit of glucose along with those, it'll make sure that you got it. Oh yeah, the malting process though. So when you're malting, you're basically germinating, and what that does is you're soaking it in water, and that water will break through that hard husk and get in there, and it'll send out a radical. That first little green thing that comes out is called a radical. Not spelled CAL. I think it's spelled radical with a CLA instead of CAL. Radical. It's a radical with, I think, CLA. But anyway, it's that little foot that comes out first, that little green spout. And you want to stop your fermentation process on corn right when that thing comes out and it's like a 1/4 inch long. You don't want to get it too long, because the longer that radical gets, that means the more endosperm and energy it's using from the endosperm to actually produce that. That's what the endosperm does. It helps that kernel produce this radical, and it helps it get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is all processes that are taking place, usually underground. Um, so it's using the energy stored from this endosperm to promote that growth, right? And then once it sends up the leaves, the I can't say it right, but the cotyledon leaves, those open up, and then you start photosynthesis. So you start getting light. But if you stop it just as that little radical gets out, you'll still have the maximum amount of starches in the malted grains still. But if you let it go too long, then it starts eating away at some of that. You'll lose some starch in the process. So you don't, when you malt, you don't want to let it get too long. Now, um, when you do barley, it's a little different. So you'll have like multiple legs coming out, and it's a little different from that. So you don't want to stop at that first little shoot because it'll have multiples. Same with like wheat. So it's a little different. Maybe I'll get some pictures for next week and show you guys for that. But in malting, maybe we'll talk more about malting next week. That'll be a topic to for Wednesday. We'll talk more about malting, the malting process, and what it does, and how it activates the amylase from in there, because the amylase isn't activated until the water reaches it and breaks down some of in the aileurone layer. You start getting some of the amylase that's stored in those, and starts the process of breaking down those sugars to feed that little um, radical that starts coming out. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about malting next week. That'll be a good topic for everybody to kind of do a little bit of research on, and it's a lot of fun to do. It takes time and a lot of. It's so easy just to buy it malted, especially the barley. But I do like malting my wheat. I get wheat from a local source really cheap, so I'll malt my own wheat. But I don't have a really good cheap source of barley locally yet, so I just usually buy that malted. But it's also good to malt your corn if you want to. It'll help smooth the flavor out, and it changes the profile of it a little bit. Um, So it's always interesting, but you got to stop it and dry it. You want to dry it. You also want to get that little radical off, because that little radical is bitter as fuck. Um, I run a drip rate, never stream keg. Yep, that's perfect. 4-inch column, awesome. 2-inch, good. 218 with the lobby, awesome. Zero flavor, just hot. From 160 proof down to tails, just no flavor, just fire. Well, we got to figure out now. Have you done just corn, or you did say multi-grains? Wow, we've got to figure out what's going on. Try increasing your malts. Try chocolate malt. I guarantee you, you put a fucking chocolate malt in there, you'll get some flavor. You might not like it, but my God, you'll get some different flavors. Those can be overpowering, but maybe add a little chocolate malt or something to it, or uh, some of your blonde sweet malts, honey malts or something might give you a little different profile. But definitely try putting it on some oak, bro, because it's ethanol tastes like ethanol, right? So if you got hearts, you got ethanol. So if you're not, you can also, if you run a thumper or jar rigs, you can put some cream corn in the jar rigs, and that'll definitely give you a good corny corn liquor flavor. That's a good secret that you learn here. But yeah, cream corn from a can into a jar rig, or if you can get the big gallons and dump it in a small thumper. You don't want a big huge because it takes so much. But yeah, that'll help. Try some chocolate malts and some honey malts. But most importantly, Randy, buy some barrel staves, or if you know anybody that has a barrel, or if you can buy barrels, I'm not sure where you are. Usually you can get once used barrels here in the States. Facebook Marketplace has them. You can store it in that or get barrel staves, just the barrel wood pieces, and like sand off the gray side that was normally on the outside, or plane it down, however you want to do it. Um, and then make sure you get all sawdust. Don't any sawdust. And then take a torch, just a regular, propane torch to it, and blacken it on all sides, and get it good and black, charcoal. Let it sit cool, or dip it in some water, put it out, and then put that in your liquor and let that sit, and let it get some tannins and let it age a little while with that stave in there, and let it go, a few weeks to a month or two, and just kind of go by color every once in a while. Take a little sip, and you'll definitely be satisfied with the flavors that you get from it, Randy. When we distill, we get 20 to 40% flavor. When you put it on the barrel, then you get the remainder, 60 to 80% of flavor. So, I talk about that every week. I'll stress it because a lot of people will drink a white whiskey and they're expecting more smoky, caramely, vanilla flavors that basically you're getting from wood, that you're not going to get from just distillation. Now, you can get some good vanilla notes and caramel notes if you do everything right and if you use some specialty grains. But try just aging it a little bit on some wood and see how that works for you, brother. Because you can buy the spirals; those work well too. I tend to shy away from the chips. I know a lot of people like using the chips, but you get a lot of tannins from chips, and tannins are bitter. And if you don't mind the bitterness and that they give, that's fine. I mean, they use tannins in winemaking. I use tannins in winemaking too, for that bitterness, in some of my drier wines and stuff. Um, but yeah, if you can get some barrel staves, or the spirals work real well too. If you want to use the chips, just don't use so many, and try that. What's going on, Donald? How you doing, brother? Good to see you in here, my man. Um, but try that out, Randy, and let me know how it works. And just take a little sip, until you get it to where you like the flavor, and then pull it. Just pull that stave out. You can reuse it a few times, then you can plane it down and char it and keep using it. But it won't be as good because the alcohol gets into the pores of the wood as well. It gets beyond that char and get beyond that toast, and it gets into the pores of the wood, and you can only pull so much flavor out of those pores. And so, your barrel stage is going to be about that. Hold on. Well, let me get a stage. Okay. So here's a typical barrel stave. All right. You can see this grade outside, and you can actually see a band where the metal band was there. So this is the outside. Just plane this down. Just sand it and plane it down to where you just get to bare wood. On your sides, you can see where the char gets some depth in there. Okay. And on the same side here, and on this side, you've got a certain level of char. Now that's not a real heavy char. A heavy char would be look like an alligator's back. It'll show some blistering of the wood, I guess, and some creases. Looks like, more like an alligator back. So this is just a very lesser char. This comes from this is my neighbor, uses these for making furniture and plaques and stuff. This is from a barrel head, just a big old piece from a barrel head that I'll cut into smaller chunks. But yeah, just take something like this. This will fit perfectly in your jars, cut in half, and just take a torch and torch them down better. That's not charred enough for me, so I'll char it harder than that till I get that, heavy char. And then I'll cut this in half, and I'll get two. I can use that in a quart, and just one of those in a quart will work just fine. Couple few weeks, month, telling you, man, you'll dig it. You'll be like, that's the flavor I was looking for, man. Eureka. You'll get that eureka moment, because that's what you're missing. You're missing, if you like a good whiskey and a good bourbon and a good scotch, that's what you're missing. I'll be right back. But I guarantee, if you like whiskey and bourbon and you're making good cuts, you'll definitely like that better, Randy. Promise you, bro. Absolutely. Another good use for heads. They make good cleaners for stills, bongs, whatever you may do. I mean, there's a lot of good things for it, but it also great for cleaning your copper and running through again. So if you want to collect your heads, you can run them through. Just make sure you run a little bit of water through afterwards to help rinse those out. And don't run pure heads through. Always proof your alcohol down to 80 proof or lower. I know a lot of people will argue me up and down over this, and I just ignore them. I tune them out. It's not a fact, it's a safety thing. So proof it down to 80 before you don't run anything higher in your still. Probably can, but is it worth the risk? No. And people swear up and down that no, it won't. If you do the research, there is a certain point that alcohol will spontaneously combust, and given the right temperature and pressure, that actual temperature can be lower than what you think, and it's just a safety thing. You really don't need to. You shouldn't, so don't do it. But yeah, proof them down and run some heads through for cleaning. Absolutely, especially for copper. On your copper and stuff, it helps a lot. Damn it, it's shot time. Oh my god, I can't believe it, bro. You've been slacking on me. Where you been, Shadow? I've been depending on David. He doesn't call it often enough for me. I drink a little bit in between. 15 on an 18. If you're running all the way down to your sweet water, it'll take a good long while. I think mine takes I might go a little faster. I get a drip in 45 to an hour on mine. I'll be pretty much into the hearts pretty well at 4 hours. But 9 hours, I think I've run as much as 12. But I think that was some pretty high proof, and that had tails in it, so the proof was up, and you run it a little bit longer when you run a little higher proof, and you got more alcohol in it, and you're running it all the way down, so you can do the sour mash. So yeah, sometimes you will have some extended runs, but when you get to the tails, you don't have to do the separate jar shit anymore. Okay, when you get to tails and you're running into something that you're just going to rerun, and you're not concerned about sweet water, you can just put a bucket there and catch it all in a bucket, and then the next time you're ready to run, you just pour that bucket in your still, pour the rest of your mash, just whatever you got mashed in that you're going to run, pour that in there and then distill. So but yeah, anytime you do increase that, you're going to get more alcohol and an extended time to run, especially if you're going to be using your back set for sour mash. Absolutely. Yeah. Smell, feel, and taste. It's in smell and feel, and looking at how I've noticed, I can see how the drip hits the surface, and start, especially tails, because it'll sometimes bead. It'll hit and dance on the surface when it starts getting oily from your fusel oils. So even looking at some clues like that, especially in brandies, and oily, oily cornies. Yeah, you'll start seeing those a little bit more when you get more fusel oils. And if you want to, for your tails to make your tails run a little better, you can get a strainer and put some charcoal from your staves or any charcoal that is pure charcoal. Don't get this shit for your grill, but make your own charcoal with those staves. You know, you can get some thin stuff and fry it and just burn it to crisp and add those chunks, rinse them good so you don't get the black, dust in there. But add those to like a little stainless or a wire mesh skimmer on the top or a coffee filter, and run your tails through that, and that'll help take out some of those oils and make the next run a little better, and it'll also help your sweet waters. Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about, yeah, definitely. I started the tails um, right where I think the cutoff is, and then I work towards the heads because you definitely don't want to start at that end because, yeah, like we were talking, it definitely can spoil your palate. And once you get acetone on your tongue, it's like everything you taste tastes like that. And it's, you could be in the hearts and still like, I can still taste it. And it's not there. It's just you're just retasting it off your tongue again. So that's why a lot of times they, when they do a lot of samplings, they'll wash it around in their mouth. They'll just spit the shit out, man. It's like you just wasted alcohol. But that's just the way that they chew it. I've seen them actually literally chew it and shit. I mean, I'm not that guy. I'm not that. I can pick up notes and flavors, but I am definitely no sommelier or somebody that can pick up all these different notes like a lot of people do. They amaze me. I mean, I wish my palate was that good, but I guess all these years of drinking, probably fried my taste buds. COVID kind of did a number on them too. I used to be able to taste and smell a lot better pre-COVID than I've been able to post-COVID. I did notice a lot of that. But absolutely, yep. Never aired it out. Just sealed it within 30 minutes. I'm trying it out just with the paper towel. Yep, paper towels work fine. Coffee filter is expensive. I don't recommend them. Cheesecloth works great too. Um, Actually, cheesecloth lets a lot through, and it just keeping the fruit flies. For me, keeping the fruit flies out is my purpose in even covering it. But because I get a lot of fruit flies from the wine and stuff I make, and those are bad, bad to have. Only making a gallon and a half. Use pies. All right, brother. I think I think once you start making good cuts, I think once you put that on some oak, I think it'll make you a believer. 80% is 40 proof. Yes, that would be perfectly fine. Yeah, 80% is 40 proof. So yeah, you'll be fine. Yep, you get methanol all the way, absolutely. And you'll get heads and acetone all the way, and aldehydes. Yep, yep. I mean, actually, let me see if I've got this chart here. They they believed that when you distilled at first, everything would come off all at the same time, and now they're finding that your 4 shots. Well, this is a stripping one. Let me get away from that. Let's see. Let me do the one that's the actual finishing run and not a stripping run. If I've got it. If not, I'm just gonna use this one. But anyway, this breaks it down and just shows you how the heads, kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller. and the ethanol gets larger and larger, and then you start seeing water, which is white, and tails, which is green. Well, they've actually found out that that red will be thinner here, thinner here, thinner, 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 thinner. But even over here, there'll be a few dots of red. So your four shots, you never totally get rid of. You will get rid of most of them here earlier on. So this strip probably should be a little bit bigger, maybe a little smaller, 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 and then it just becomes dots, and how many dots are in here. So because these four shots of methanol will exist in the lowest of your tails. So that's because of it being an azeotrope. Um, Azeotrope means that basically your boiling points change because of different azeotropes being combined. Water is an azeotrope. Ethanol is an azeotrope. Methanol is an azeotrope. Isopropyl alcohol is in there as an azeotrope. There's a lot of other aldehydes and things that are in there that are also azeotropic, and they change your boiling point. So that's why we can't just fractionally distill. If you hear a lot of people say, yep, I heat my still up to 180 degrees pot temperature, and I cook off all that methanol first because it cooks off at 173.1 degrees, and I do mine at 175.80, and I cook every bit of it off first. That's bullshit. Actually, you get no methanol off if you heat it up to 175 degrees in your pot, 175 to 80, nothing's coming off. And I'll show you why. It's because it's an azeotrope. And with azeotropes, what happens when you got azeotropes mixed together, the boiling point changes. So when you add alcohol and water, depending on the percentage of each, and I'll show you a chart in just a second. Let me get rid of this chart here and add. Here we go. Here's the chart that shows it. Okay, so at 173.1 degrees, we're here. And the reason it doesn't go all the way to the end is because it's an azeotrope. And it never crosses that line, and it never crosses this line, because once it gets to a certain point, it's just pure water and alcohol at the same proportion coming off until you're out of water and you're out of alcohol and your still is dry. Okay. And at the other end, this is 173.1. And if you have 100%, now this is the temperature. Okay. And this is the proof. Let me get rid of that, and you might be able to see. Okay, down here, this is the concentration of alcohol. Okay, and this is percent volume, so it doesn't get above 100. 100% is 200 proof, right? So once you start here, pure alcohol, yes. If you're boiling pure alcohol, nothing else in your still, which I don't recommend doing because it's going to explode. You're going to have a fire. And it's very dangerous, even if you don't. But don't do it, especially beginners. Never, ever, ever, ever. But here, you will see that if you cook almost pure alcohol at 173.1, yes, it will come off. Right, Clint's right. This is what we're talking about, is because of the azeotropism, because of it being an azeotrope. And this is what I'm demonstrating here. When you get to 173.1, yes, you will cook off. If it's pure alcohol, it will boil off at 173.1 fact. The second you add water, look at what happened to the boiling point of the ethanol. It's up to 175 now. And 120 proof. It's 177. Well, I thought that dude said he had some boiling off at 175 to 180. Well, hell, if you have 100 proof alcohol, maybe, but who runs 100 proof alcohol? Nobody. Your mash is producing 10%, which means you're going to be in your 190s, 18%, right here. You're going to be in your 190s. Pot temp, not vapor, pot temp. So you're going to be in 190s because of azeotrope before any of your ethanol boils off. And methanol the same. It's locked in too. It's you will get a little bit coming off, but at the same ratio as your ethanol. But because you have a lesser percent of methanol in there, you will boil it off at the same rate as your ethanol. But because you have so much more ethanol and so little ethanol and so little methanol, if it boils off at the same rate, you will get much smaller methanol proportionally as it cooks off, right? So, damn fruit fly. So as that happens, eventually you get to a very little point, but it never goes totally away. So it will be there throughout the whole fucking run, all the way to the end, but in smaller and smaller and smaller percentages. Same thing with the methanol, or with your fours. So they're going to run and they're going to come out all the way throughout. But these people that saying, they're cooking everything off at 180, well, unless their liquor is 90 proof, unless their mash is 90 proof, which is crazy. Nobody gets a mash to 90 proof unless you're adding a lot of freaking Matels. And even then, you shouldn't be doing it because it's too high. So no, you're not cooking that off. So it's a misnomer. They're full of shit. They've never distilled. They're a Google distiller. Don't ever listen to them. I've had people argue with me, and I'm gonna bring my buddy. He's a scientist, a nuclear physicist in here. He'll tell you, and he tells me all this shit because he knows. He does a little research. Yeah, alcohol boils off at 100. Ethanol boils 173.1, and he doesn't think about azeotropes. So read about azeotropes and what causes that. Well, it depends on so if you're putting in tails, let's just say you have a really hot mash, you've got 1.1, which I think equates to probably a 16% maybe. So it's going to be in the mid 190s before you're going to see anything cooking off. If you're adding a lot of tails and you got some pretty proofy tails, maybe mid 187, 180s, high 180s. If you got a lot of tails in there, that's 40 proof. So if you got a lot of tails in there, yeah, you can have some coming off here. So, but because of it being an azeotrope is why, like Clint and I'm talking about, you're going to see traces of four shots and heads all the way through this fucking run. It doesn't matter. Less and less percentages, but and like Clint's talking about right now, that's why at this point right here, when you get like 4% and you don't change the 4% alcohol and water ratio will remain the same until you completely boil every bit of alcohol out of that still, or I mean water out of that still. It'll remain the same. So this line just keeps going up and up, and it will never cross right here. It will never get to zero until the water is zero. And when you get zero water, yeah, then you'll have zero alcohol coming off because you'll have nothing left. But that's because of azeotropes, and they're a little more scientific than a lot of beginners need, but that's why. And this is a good chart to have, and it'll tell you most people, if you don't have tails, you're going to start seeing a little bit of action at 190. If you got 18% alcohol, which is a very high, that's as high as EC 1118 will get before you start killing the yeast, right? So that's as high as you can freaking get, just about, right? Without adding tails. That's still above 190. And that's pot temp now, not vapor temperature. A lot of people have their thermometers in the vapor path. That's going to be even lower. So I think that's going to be a good spot to end. If people want this this chart, it's great to have, along with the other charts that I like to share a lot. You can find it on DIY Shining Stuff on Facebook and the militia page, which y'all should be a member of by now. If you're not, I have no idea why. Get in there and ask you questions there as well. That way you can ask them every day. If you can't wait till Wednesday and Saturday to hear it from your favorite shiner, jump in there and ask the questions during the week, and we got a bunch of people in there that'll help you. Right, exactly. And you're right. You'll never get beyond this point right here without a molecular sieve or vacuum distillation. So if you distill with no oxygen present, than you can get, or if you use a molecular sieve, then you can get there. Molecular sieve I've talked about before. It's basically a ceramic that has pores so small only molecules of alcohol can go through it, but because water molecules are so large, it's basically like a strainer, but it's so small. We're talking microns, maybe 250, maybe Clint can help me on that number. I'm not sure exactly. If you can Google that for me, the micron size that you get to where alcohol will go through, but water can't, because that alcohol, ethanol molecule is so small. It goes through this molecular sieve. It's so small. The micron, I'm thinking 250. I'm probably wrong. It may be smaller than that. But the water molecule, where it's bigger, won't go through it. So it basically, you can filter water out with a molecular sieve, but they're expensive. It's not the most efficient, but you can do it. And that's the only way you're really going to get pure 100% ethanol. And amazingly enough, the second you open that jar, it it starts sucking moisture right out of the air that just hit it. So it's automatically just cut itself to 199.9, and it'll continue to do that for quite some time. It's called hygroscopic, HYGRO, hygroscopic, and it means it's stripping. We talk about this is like desiccants, so it's stripping moisture out of the air, which is why when you drink a lot of high proof liquor, why it parches your throat is because it's literally pulling moisture and water out of off your skin and out of, it's pulling the saliva and everything off your skin, and it leaves you parched. You're literally parched because it's pulling all that out. It's hygroscopic. So another term to look up, hygroscopic. So look up azeotropes and hygroscopic, and that's a pretty good place to end the show tonight. So hope everybody learned a little something, and hope Randy gets to put some of that on oak. So Randy, maybe next week, put some, if you can get some white oak, you can go to the lumber store and just get pure white oak. Make sure to get any sand off any kind of manufacturing oils that come from the blades or anything. Sand that off, clean it, wipe it down good. You can wipe it down with literally heads if you want to, and then take a torch and torch the shit out of it. I mean, make it alligator char and all the way around, and then just put it out, let it sit in water for a minute, and rinse it, and then put that in your alcohol and let it sit for a week or two. It's a little slower using this method than like the chips, but you don't get a lot of those bitter tannins that make you get like it's over oaked. Yeah. Ethanol can suck. Yeah, it can suck fucking the water through pores and metal, through corks. I mean, yeah. It's like a desiccant. It's like those things they throw in stuff to absorb the moisture so it doesn't rust. Little desiccant packs. Ethanol does the same damn thing. So. Good night, everybody. Hope you learned something tonight, and hope y'all have some great mashes going and some even better distillations. We will see everybody on Hump Day. And this week, I got a buddy of mine coming on. If y'all haven't seen or watched Still Talking with Big Easy and Sean Rigsby and Matt Lemaster and Uncle Joey, I'm having Big Easy on. So that's going to be a fun time. He's always a great guy. I'm going to have him on, and we can all sit and talk, and he can give a little bit of his background. They do a great show called Still Talking. It's on YouTube and on Facebook as well. A great guy. I've known him for many years, and him and Phil Billy are pretty tight, you could say. And so we're going to have him on, and it should be for a pretty fun show. He's always pretty jovial and has a good time. So he'll be on there with us Wednesday to help answer questions and hang out, and hopefully you guys can meet him. And they do a podcast on Monday nights. same night as Lisa. So, sometimes we got to make these choices. But they're good guys, and they have a lot of fun. They do a lot of interview type podcasts. They bring a lot of distillers on and interview a lot of influential people in the craft and talk about what they're doing. They talk a lot about different bourbons and liquors and stuff. So you never know where their conversations are going to go. So it's a good show to watch as well. But so is Lisa's with her tinctures and stuff. So got to make a choice. But Wednesday he'll be on and should be a lot of fun. And I look forward to seeing you all then. And until then, shine on. Everybody have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you Wednesday, same time, same bat channel. Shine on, y'all. Take care.